Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 541. Brush with Rena. The gorilla-tiger's eyes turned from being the hunter into the hunted. It realized the power and destruction by those red dust that surrounded Rena. It wanted to run away, but the fear of the diva woman with three faces bearing down on it made its muscles stiffen tight. By the time it regained control over its own body, Rena had already finished her transformation into a red dust Beyblade and slammed herself onto the monster's chest. Its fiery fur tried to fight off the dust that was slowly disintegrating its armored skin, but no matter how hot the monster tried to burn it with the red dust remained unharmed. Rena's spinning red cloud of Beyblade continued to sandblast the gorilla tiger with red dust at super high speeds, eventually disintegrating its skin and fur until blood was drawn. And with one last move, Rena stopped rotating and revealed herself within the red dust with her pair of scimitars slicing the monster diagonally. The gorilla tiger got thrown backwards with force. Its huge body crashed through multiple trees, destroying them into splinters before eventually landing on a collection of felled tree trunks unconscious. Rena landed on both feet perfectly before casually swinging her scimitars in the air to get rid of the blood pooling in its blade. Watching this, Michael had the instinct to clap for her wonderful display of power. Her diva and her ability looked tremendously destructive, especially with those red dust that Michael estimated to each be as strong as a diamond. "Looks like you don't need my help after all," he said to her jokingly. Rena slowly turned around to face Michael. And strangely enough, there wasn't a friendly look on her face. Hello?" he asked her. She tilted her head and slowly raised the scimitars in her hand as if she was about to use them. At this point, Michael knew that she was just a hair's breadth away from fighting him. He quickly raised his hands to signal that he wasn't planning on being hostile towards her. "I come in peace," he reminded her. But still Rena walked towards him, scimitars in hand, and diva still manifested above her. Those red dust continued to revolve around her, pulsating with each step she took. "Okay, now there's no need to do this," he warned her. "We could be allies, friends even." That didn't do the trick. She continued to approach him with an angry look on her face similar to the left face of her diva. He would have thought that he did something bad to her, but he noticed that she wasn't exactly mad at him. She was mad at something and he was just in the way. "Okay, if you don't want to be friends, that's fine. We can just be acquaintances. Or maybe not. I think that we should just go our own ways. How about it?" He didn't want to fight her at all. Not only was he trying to keep a low profile, but Rena was also the daughter of Vishnu, who was the main producer of sugar for his soda business. He didn't want to sully that relationship over a useless fight that wouldn't achieve anything. But no matter what he said to her, Rena wasn't listening. She continued to walk towards Michael before she finally stopped. "I need to prove to my father that I can bring Spice Vice to the top all by myself," she muttered underneath her breath. At first she wanted to completely avoid Michael, so that she wouldn't have to deal with what her father told her to do, which was to get close to Michael and earn his heart. But now, out of pure coincidence, he was the first person she saw out of all of them. Michael wanted to ally with her, but this was the exact opposite thing she wanted to do. She wanted to prove that she was strong enough by herself and that she didn't need him or anyone else to win. Her red dust swirled as they gathered near her palm. It gathered up and coagulated into a small bird. And surprisingly enough, as the bird finished its formation, its wings started to flutter with life. Its beak opened wide like a baby crying at its birth. She then threw the bird into the air before it started to flutter its wings and fly. Rena continued to make doves from the red dust around her, eventually creating 20 identical birds that flew around her and on top of her. "Her dust can create objects and animals," Michael noted. "I guess she can create anything in her imagination." As he was observing her ability, Rena commanded the doves towards Michael's direction. These birds might look innocent, but their beaks were as strong as a diamond tip. Michael would have to be even more careful since they weren't made out of mana at all but produced by her diva. "I'm not going to marry you," Rena screamed out. Hearing this caught Michael off guard, almost letting one of the birds scrape by the side of his head. "What? Who said anything about marrying you?" he shouted back at her. But she didn't seem to care as she rushed towards him with both scimitars ready to cleave him in half. Not only that, but there were about 20 doves hovering above Michael, just waiting for the right moment to swoop down and peck through his entire body. Meanwhile, on the auction itself, the crowd was drawn towards the action on the bottom left side of the pocket dimension. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our first fight in the lock region. Michael from the Reborn company and Rena from Spicevice have found themselves on opposite sides. Barnaby announced. The crowd used their binoculars to peer through the hole and onto Michael and Rena. There they saw Michael being forced on the defensive as Rena continued to swing her scimitars towards him. Not only that, but her red dust doves were circling above him, diving down at any opportunity they got to pester Michael. Look at Rena's excellent ability control. She's controlling 20 of those birds at the same time as she's fighting him. She got better than last year. I think she has a chance to go up the rankings during this auction. I respect this Michael kid. He's not only rich, but it's also impressive that he can last this long against Rena. Many people were amazed at Michael's wealth and were even rooting for him to last longer in the auction. However, they considered it his bad luck that he encountered Rena so early in the game. They thought that the only way Michael could have a chance at those drops was if he stayed in stealth throughout the entire game and sneakily crawled to the glass dome to get the drops once he had the keys. But now that Rena was attacking him, they didn't think he had a chance against her. Of course, there were a few sharp-eyed individuals who saw that despite being forced to back away from Rena, Michael was never in any sort of danger at all. He seemed to be waiting and quietly observing everything he could about Rena's ability. Chapter 542. Rena's Dust. Michael used a simple earth wall to defend against one of Rena's scimitar. Her sharp blades and quick turning momentum were able to tear through the wall quite easily, but this gave him enough time to dodge away from the 5 doves that pecked at his body. A magic circle appeared in front of his palm, manifesting a fireball upscaled to a 5th star spell. With a single thought, the fireball shot towards one of the birds that was swooping down towards him. The ball and the bird met in the midair, creating a fiery explosion. The fireball was able to successfully destroy the bird's body, turning it into nothing but dust. But despite getting hit by the magic spell Hedon, the red dust remained completely unharmed. And just a few seconds later, the cloud of dust formed into another dove as if nothing ever happened. As expected, it's not affected by normal spells. How about a spell that's abnormal? While Rena continued to swing her scimitars at him, Michael used simple air magic to let himself be taken by the flow of the air. This allowed him to much more easily dodge her attacks. And while he was preoccupied with her, one of the doves swooped down and targeted his shoulder. This time he didn't dodge away. He let the red dust dove come extremely close to his skin. But of course, before he could get injured, an invisible prismatic shield appeared around him and protected him from the attack. The red dust dove met with Michael's unity defense. The bird's beak was where the red dust was most concentrated, so it was to briefly bend Michael's unity barrier. But as it had prolonged contact with the prismatic shield, the beak started to disintegrate and melt. The bird, feeling threatened for the first time, quickly flew away from him with half of its beak missing entirely. It was at this point that Michael noticed that there wasn't any red dust coming to regenerate the bird's beak. It remained in that injured state until Rena herself threw a few dust powder into the bird and healed its broken beak back into its peak form. I see. That's the downside of her ability, he realized. Her red dust only has a limited quantity. Once destroyed, it can't go back. Knowing about this made his fight with Rena a little bit easier. As long as he could destroy her red dust, then his victory was only a matter of time. How did you do that? Rena questioned him, frightened. She didn't think that Michael would be able to destroy her red dust so soon. He wasn't even using his magnetic ability yet. It was all because of that strange invisible shield that was around him. Angry, she commanded the rest of her birds to bombard Michael with their clawed feet, hoping to break through his shield. At the same time, she jumped up towards him and rotated her body in midair, creating a powerful twister with her scimitar. It was a two-pronged attack with her birds. In response, Michael created 2 magic circles at the same time. One of them summoned a snake-like dragon made out of pure air mana. As the doves rushed towards Michael, it brushed past them and caused some of the doves to be caught up in its wind. The second magic circle created a very viscous type of water similar to slime. And as Rena's rotating body reached towards him, he commanded the slime water to go in front of him. Her scimitar, with the speed of almost at 1000 RPM, would have tore through anything it touched. But as it made contact with the viscous slime, its speed began to get bogged down by the thickness of the liquid itself. Rena found herself falling to the floor as her momentum fell to 0. She landed on the ground and found her footing. Immediately, she commanded the red dust around her to vibrate at incredibly fast speeds to disintegrate the slimy water that covered her scimitar and her body. Meanwhile, at least half of the birds were able to pass through the air dragon and finally reached Michael's body. The red dust birds spiraled around him before diving down beak first. A total of 11 sharp beaks targeted most of his upper body and crashed into his prismatic shield. Some lucky doves skidded against the prismatic shield and slid off into the ground. Most doves, though, were stuck with their beaks plunged into the absolute unity defense, which was slowly getting disintegrated with the power of unity. Rena's face turned into one of panic as she realized that her dust was slowly disintegrating. Nothing she did seemed to be working at all. Even though she was at the peak of the 4th stage body formation, she couldn't break through Michael's simple defensive spell. That was supposed to be impossible. Because of this, a thought soon crept up in her mind. Was her father right? Was there more to this boy that meets the eye? Was he really stronger than what she thought? Was he stronger than her? No, she cried out in denial. I can't fall now. She reached down on one of her pockets and grabbed a handful of whatever was inside it. She opened her hand, revealing it to be a mound of yellow dust similar to that of the red dust that was surrounding her. I didn't want to use this, but I have to win. After taking in a breath of fresh air, she quickly blew the yellow dust into the environment, which slowly disseminated through the air at an incredibly fast pace. Meanwhile, the people watching the fight from above immediately recognized that yellow dust that Rena blew out. She's using it this early? Is she planning on going all out already? I thought she'd save it for Bo. Am I the only one who doesn't know what that yellow dust does? There were a lot of people who watched the auction last year. Because of that, they were able to recognize Rena's strongest and perhaps most lethal ability. That yellow dust is literally poison. Anyone caught by it will only have a few minutes left until they're knocked unconscious. Can't anyone just hold their breath? That's not how abilities work. The fact that she brought it out meant that Michael is already poisoned immediately no matter what he tries to do. After hearing this, a lot of people immediately thought that this was incredibly overpowered. If it's so powerful, then why didn't she use it earlier in the fight? That's because he's not the only one that's poisoned. She's affected as well. That's the drawback of her ability. Michael felt his breath become shallower and shallower. His head started to ache, with his vision starting to become topsy-turvy. Not only that, but he felt his body start to weaken, not just physically but also magically. It was as if his magic veins were slowly getting pinched, lowering the quantity of mana that was circulating in his body. He felt his knees start to weaken, almost making him fall to the ground. This is poison? But you're poisoned too. He looked forward and saw Rena in a similar shape as he was. She limped, struggling to even stand still. That's right. We'll have to fight in a poisoned condition. But I am used to it. I can fight better than you. Just as she was saying that, she suddenly saw Michael attach something to his chest. Then a click sound echoed through the forest. Chapter 543, Poison Dominated. As soon as she heard that click, she saw Michael completely change from someone suffering from poison weakness to someone that was as healthy as a newborn. The color returned to his skin, his posture straightened up, and the power of mana circulated around his body and allowed him to feel his vitality returning to normal form. Rena couldn't believe what she was seeing. The poison that was supposed to have turned him as feeble as a 90-year-old was quickly reverted within the blink of an eye. It happened within an instant. But as she looked at Michael's entire body, the answer soon became clear. There was a faint figure of a pair of arms manifested above his head. It was his diva. He had finally used his ability to somehow counteract her poisoning and nullify it without problem at all. Rena took a step back in disbelief. She wanted to throw up. This was supposed to be her ultimate move, one that would have been able to defeat Bo and all the other Rising Six members easily. After all, the yellow dust that she used wasn't simply just a normal poison cloud. It didn't infect its users through contact. It used the power of her diva to contaminate Michael with her ability no matter what. Even if he had that impenetrable shield, he would still feel the effects of her poison. She thought she'd finally gotten him. But now it was as if nothing had happened to him at all. Meanwhile, she was still sick with her own poison. Cough. You're also in the 4th stage. How did your ability overpower mine? She spent a year training herself and her abilities. Meanwhile, Michael looked like he had just transcended to the 4th stage quite recently. By all known metrics, her ability should have been able to overpower his. The crowd were just as surprised as Rena to see Michael come out of her poison yellow dust like it was nothing. They knew Rena was a formidable magnetic, and even Bo would have been caught vulnerable if she was hit with those yellow dust she carried around. Wow, look at that. That must be Michael's diva. What kind of ability does he have? Did anyone see what he did? I saw him put something in his chest, but I don't know what it is. I guess his ability is some kind of healing power? With the appearance of Michael's diva, people soon realized that he wasn't just a kid who had a lot of money. He was someone who belonged with the likes of the Rising Six. It was especially apparent since he had shown that he could even fight toe-to-toe against Rena. Just 13 years old, and he's already in the 4th stage. That's nothing short of genius. But wait, where's his mithril relic? I don't see it anywhere. Oh, he must be using a small accessory type of mithril relic, just like Alaric's ring. Back in the game, Michael pleaded with Rena once again for her to see that fighting was useless. It's not too late to be allies, he reminded her. We don't have to eliminate each other. However, his pity seemed to have made her even more resistant to his suggestion. I can't. I have to do this by myself, she said, tears almost running down her cheeks. The poison made her feel even more vulnerable than before. Michael pursed his lips and felt a little bit sorry for her. She looked like she was carrying the weight of the whole world on her shoulders. She was being bogged down by the pressure she put on herself. Knowing that she wouldn't be persuaded no matter what he knew, he had no choice. He raised his hand and created a violet magic circle in front of his palms. A purplish-green liquid shot out of his hands and gathered in a ball. This was pure poison mana. And with his absolute control over it, he was able to form and mold this liquid into the form of a venomous black widow spider. It was 10 times the size of the original spider and was colored purple and black with poison dripping out of its skin. The black widow spider dropped into the ground and jumped towards Rena. Red dust gathered at her fingertips as she created a large eagle whose main source of prey were spiders exactly like the one Michael conjured with magic. The eagle cried out before intercepting the poison black widow's arc using its talons. Sensing the threat, the spider shot out a spray of poison web intending to poison the eagle and slow it down. But since the eagle was made out of an ability, it was completely impervious to normal magic and mana. It tore through the spray of web and continued to hunt down the spider. But the Black Widow was able to shoot a single thread of web towards the branch above, using it to pull itself upwards and completely avoid the eagle's hunt. Michael knew that this wasn't enough, so he conjured another magic circle in the air. This time it was colored neon blue as it manifested a bolt of lightning that shot out at literal lightning speeds. Rena, still poisoned, conjured a thick protective barrier from her red dust to defend against the electric attack. But it seemed that the lightning wasn't aimed at her. Thunder crackled as the lightning arced upwards, completely avoiding Rena and hitting the violet Black Widow instead. An explosion rang out as the spider got caught with high-temperature plasma. The branch that it had been hanging onto was burned into a charcoal black, with some lightning streaks coming down into the tree itself. Rena thought Michael had miscalculated his attack, since it looked like he just destroyed his own magic spell. But as she looked up, she was completely shocked to see that not only was the Black Widow still in one piece, but its entire body was also crackling with electricity, as if the lighting imbued it into the construct. First of all, the crowd were once again surprised to see that Michael was able to create a realistic depiction of a spider using purely poison mana. Wizards and mages alike knew how difficult it was to imitate a life form using only one type of mana. He must have a talent for poison mana. That's really rare. Yeah, he must be really good at it too, since he could control that Black Widow with ease. And it was at that moment that they saw Michael shoot out the lightning arc into his own spider. The crowd were about to complain that Michael had just wasted his own mana, but then they saw something that made them lean forward in shock. The Black Widow was now imbued with the power of lightning mana. It was as if the spider had been bathed in electricity and could now wield it as if it was a stormy cloud. What? He changed his own spell as it is being cast. I didn't know that was even possible. It's not supposed to be. That's only possible if someone has a mastery over the two mana. Chapter 544. Elemental Black Widow. Creating an animated spell like the Black Widow was already complicated enough. But then Michael went ahead and changed the very magic theory of the spell completely out of the blue, and while the Black Widow was still casted into the real world. The difficulty for such a feat was almost impossible. Even the very best and most senior wizards would not be able to replicate this exact scenario while in the comfort of their own homes. Meanwhile, Michael did it in a high-stakes environment while fighting a magnetic of his own level. That means he has two-element mastery. I see now why he's the leader of the Reborn company. He's not only rich, but he's also talented in the mystic arts. Coupled with his strange magnetic ability, I think he has a real chance of defeating Rena at this point. Back in the game, Rena stared at the electrically charged Black Widow with shock written all over her face. She was starting to realize that she completely underestimated his skills in the mystic arts. But she resolved herself. If she could hang on a little bit longer, the poison in her body would wear off. This would be a doable task, since she knew that despite the double-element Black Widow above her, it wouldn't affect her as long as she used her red dust as proper defense. The Black Widow faced Rena and shot out 3 bursts of web in her direction. Each one was charged with almost 1,000 volts of electricity, enough to turn her completely unconscious. She commanded her red dust to coalesce into a dense liquid-like splash that would wash the web away from her. The webs hit the thick red dust wave, unable to pierce through. However, the Black Widow jumped down from the tree and used the floating red dust wave to swing below it and shoot another web towards Rena. She wrapped the red dust onto her 2 scimitars and used it to hit the webs away from her and cut it from its source. The severed webs slowly floated down into the ground. However, what she didn't realize was that the webs were still charged with electricity despite it being cut off. The webs touched down onto one of the wet grass blades, and immediately a surge of electricity burst forth and electrified the entire ground. At the very last second, Rena created boots out of red dust, allowing her to be unaffected by the electricity. She knew that it would only be a matter of time until she couldn't react fast enough to defend herself, so she went ahead and attacked Michael Heaton. This was one of the best ways to deal with a mage. As she rushed towards him, Michael jumped up and floated in the air. But it looked like Rena was waiting for that, as she coated her scimitars with red dust, allowing it to become 20 times bigger than normal. With her giant weapons, she sliced horizontally towards Michael from different directions. Tens of trees were cut in half as her giant blade traveled through the air. But instead of panicking, Michael created two giant magic circles in front of him. One was glowing with a bright white light and the other was dark and was made out of shadows. Rina's eyes narrowed as she realized what Michael was trying to do. She quickly retracted the red dust from her scimitar and used it to create a giant shield behind her. As she turned around, she realized her hunch was right. The Black Widow was right behind her, about to shoot out another burst of electric web. She used her red dust to create a platform underneath her feet, keeping her away from the ground and avoiding another electrical ground situation. She then waited for the lightning to crack, but it didn't come. It was at that moment that the white magic circle shot out a beam of light outwards, hitting the Black Widow as if it had been illuminated by the sun itself. The spider soaked in all the light it could contain, eventually allowing it to glow with power. "What? Another one?" she blurted out. The light on the spider continued to grow brighter with intensity before it created a flashbang that completely blinded everyone temporarily. Rina's red dust slowly formed away from her eyes as she looked at what happened with the Black Widow. In front of her was the same spider she had been fighting against this whole time. As she looked around, she realized that it wasn't just too many spiders, but 8 of them altogether surrounding her entirely. The worst part was that they were all electrically charged, just like their mother. And without a second later, all the spiders looked in her direction and sprayed out electrically charged webs in her direction. Rina braced herself, creating a cocoon of red dust that completely encapsulated her from everything around her. With this defense, no matter how many spiders there were, they wouldn't be able to affect her red dust. Now that she was safe, she closed her eyes and focused on recovering from her own poison. With this defensive cocoon, she'll have all the time she needs. Everyone was once again in disarray as they saw Michael imbue the spider with another element. This time it was the light element, allowing the spider to duplicate itself. He has a 3-element mastery. And not only that, but it's 3 of the 4 rarest element masteries in the world. How could a genius of the mystic arts be hidden for so long? Is he from the Guild of Arcana? Wait, he has another magic circle. Don't tell me. And just as they predicted, Michael's black magic circle shot out a beam of shadow that hit the original Black Widow. A gooey black substance began to envelope the magical spider, completely covering its bulbous body and 8 legs with pure dark mana. Once the shadows were fully absorbed, the Black Widow began to shimmer in and out of reality, signifying its ability to control 4 elements at once. 4-element mastery. Wait, Michael must be the genius boy from the news. The one that won the Upperwood District tournament. That can't be. I remember people saying that the genius boy controlled water, air, earth, and fire. I must have heard it wrong. Now, despite this very impressive display of magic, they could only lament that Michael was fighting against someone who could make themselves completely impervious to mana. If it was any other fighter, then he could have finished the fight by now. He won't be able to defeat Rina while she's covered with her red dust. But it was at that moment that the Black Widow spiders began to crawl towards the red dust cocoon. What are they doing? They won't be able to affect something made out of an ability. Once all 9 magical spiders found their place on the red dust cocoon, their bodies began to pulsate with light. As the seconds passed, the pulsation became faster and faster, as if building up to something. Their bodies kept blinking and blinking before turning completely white. And a moment after that, their bodies exploded with such immense power that it destroyed everything around it. Chapter 545. Theoretical Explosion. Everything within a 10-meter diameter around the explosion turned into nothing but smithereens. The surviving trees around the crater tumbled outwards, causing other trees to fall, creating chaos. What was left was only a crater on the ground, which would have been bigger had the explosion happened on the floor. The crowd got up out of their seats and peered through the hole in the auction, trying to get a better view of what happened. Everyone gasped as they saw who was on the ground. Rina kneeled on the ground, her face and body a little bit dirted from the explosion. She held in her hands what remained of her red dust. Almost all of it was destroyed in the explosion. The only thing left was a small mound on top of her palms. Disbelief was written on her face. What? That's not possible. Those red dust are supposed to be protected by her ability. No kind of explosion from a spell could ever destroy it. This doesn't make sense. The only ones who knew what was happening were the wizards and the mages on the VIP suite reserved for the magic tower. It's true. The boy really does have masteries in all the elements. His control over them is extremely fine. That should only be achieved through 100 years of experience. Yet he's barely a teen. Tower Master, how did he destroy the red dust? Abilities should be impervious to magic spells. Everyone turned to their leader. Theoretically, a combination of the 4 elements. Light, dark, poison, and lightning will create an explosion of pure mana. Its destructive properties are different from any other bomb spell. It can explain how the red dust were destroyed in this instance, the Tower Master explained. The other senior wizards could only shake their heads. Even though they prided themselves in being eternal students of the mystic arts, they didn't know anything about that kind of explosion. Why isn't that well known? We should be focusing our research on this, suggested one of the mages. The Tower Master chuckled. The reason why not a lot of people know this is because this is one of the instances where it was only thought about theoretically. No one had ever made it practical before. Even I thought it would remain as just words on a paper for the foreseeable future. Clearly Michael had proved that it was real. Not only that, but he was able to produce it in the middle of an auction fight. He's the real genius, the Tower Master muttered. Damn it, Braxton. Why aren't you here to see this? Because of the change in schedule, Braxton was still on his way to the auction at this very moment, meaning he was missing everything that was happening in the game. Just then his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by some of the mages and wizards pointing and shouting at something. And it wasn't just them. Practically everyone in the auction was almost up at their seats. Just a few kilometers away from Michael and Rena, everyone saw a large cloud of smoke coming towards them at incredibly fast speeds. Some of the people immediately recognized what it was. No way! How could they be so unlucky? What is it? Barnaby was also surprised, not expecting this development so soon. But as an auctioneer, he had to speak up and let everyone know what was happening. Hold on to your seats, folks. Looks like our players Michael and Rena are in deep trouble. Their fight seemed to have attracted the sleeping giants underneath the ground. They are now being hunted by the great colossal earthworm. It's one of the 8-star monsters inhabiting the pocket dimension. Michael looked at Rena, expecting her surrender. He had practically destroyed her only weapon. Hey! But it was at that moment that he felt the ground shaking with vigorous intensity. It must have been equivalent to a magnitude 9 earthquake with how it was even uprooting trees from the ground. He quickly used his supreme talent to see what was happening at the source of the sound. And as he peered through the mana layer of reality, even he was caught off guard. He expected to see a monster like the gorilla tiger that had been hunting Rena before. But what he saw was something colossally bigger. Above ground, he saw the light mana signature of a mound that was just a little bit bigger than the trees. But then as he looked on the ground, he saw that the small mound was just a tiny fraction of the creature's entire body. This was a worm. Not just any worm, but a monster whose diet consisted of mountains and skyscrapers. It bore a close resemblance to the giant worm creatures in a famous sci-fi novel in his previous world. It looked just as big as those fantasy worms. However, this one was a lot more terrifying given its dense collection of mana particles around its body. Michael estimated it to be at the peak of the 8-star realm, which was something that could pose a real danger to him. Of course, he immediately started to look for ways to avoid the worm. If he stayed still, then he'd get swallowed up by the worm. With air mana gathered at his feet, he prepared to take the risk and fly out into the sky. The worm was moving fast, and it would only be a matter of a few seconds before it arrived. And just as he was about to escape, he stopped himself and looked back at the ground. Rena was staying still, kneeling on the ground and looking at her red dust, still in disbelief. There was a look of despair in her face that looked like she was giving up on everything. "Get up!" he yelled at her. But she didn't move at all. The shaking in the ground got more and more intense before finally the worm's giant mouth filled with spikes emerged from the ground, ready to devour its prey. It surfaced for a brief second before finally diving down towards him and Rena. He could still escape at this point, but Rena definitely wouldn't. She was accepting her defeat and welcomed the worm as if she was welcoming her end. The worm's giant face crashed into the ground, devouring everything and anything. What was left was a giant chasm in the ground which led to the tunnel that the worm created below the surface. The crowd watching above were grabbing their seats with anxiousness. What happened? Did they survive? A few seconds later, everything settled down. The tremors stopped as the worm disappeared below ground, its hunger now satiated. Everyone looked for any sign of life near the giant chasm on the ground. But no matter where they looked, they saw no one. Not even Michael. Rena closed her eyes and let the darkness overcome her vision. She was giving up and letting herself be swallowed by the worm. But just as she fell into the chasm of blackness that was the worm's mouth, she suddenly felt something grab her body. She opened her eyes and saw Michael grabbing her waist and slowing their fall into the worm's stomach. Chapter 546. Inside the worm. Michael and Rena must have been falling for a solid minute as they traveled through the digestive tract of the worm. His original plan was to grab Rena and fly her out of the worm's mouth. However, he felt something in his chest that was calling to him. It was a strange feeling, one that he couldn't quite explain. He didn't know why he was feeling this way, but he knew that he could only find the answer at the bottom of the worm. What can it be? Maybe a treasure left behind by the auction? This was a good guess from Michael, since he knew that Barnaby's auction happened once every year. It wouldn't be a stretch to think that they would reuse this specific pocket dimension throughout the different games of the bidding. Because of that, there must be a chance that the worm swallowed something during that time. And that something was good enough to be put in the auction. This was enough of a reason for him to take the risk and plunge himself deeper into the 8-star monster. So with Rena at his side, they traveled down the worm's body before eventually landing softly at its stomach, which was flooded with a greenish acidic liquid that was slowly disintegrating the chunks of solid earth and fallen trees that it ate while on the surface. He landed onto a small floating island with a single oak tree still attached to the ground. He softly let down Rena into the ground. She was unconscious and sleeping with her body slowly trying to recover from her own poison. And once they were safe, he took a gander at his surroundings. This place is quite cold, he remarked. Despite being inside the worm's stomach, the temperature was low enough for him to produce smoke while breathing through his mouth. He wouldn't be surprised if he found a block of ice somewhere around here due to how cold it was. The density of mana around here is also low. There's not much air mana around. There was a real solid risk of them suffocating if they were stuck here for too long. He knew he would be safe because he had his own air mana supply from his cores, but Rena would be left with nothing. I want to explore, but I can't leave here all alone here. Michael decided to build himself a temporary house made out of all the fallen trees that the worm swallowed. He began stacking logs in a rectangular pattern following a simple wooden cabin blueprint that ChatJK4 gave him. Building something with his own hands again made him reminisce about the times when he was just a kid and he was building homes in the Vanderbilt estate. He has come a long way now. After building the roof, he then worked on creating a source of fire to keep himself warm. Using some firewood he chopped into planks, he used a simple fire spell to light up into a campfire. It was at this point that he felt some movement beside him. Rena had finally awoken from her sleep and was now starting to realize where she ended up. There was a look of despair on her face seeing the endless darkness of the worm's stomach. But then her eyes softened once she saw Michael right outside of his wooden cabin warming his hands on the campfire. You're awake. Come warm yourself up. It's cold out here, he told her. Rena shivered. Just like he said, the temperature here was comparable to a deep winter. I'm fine by myself, she said, stubbornly turning her head away. I can perfectly take care of myself. She tried to command her red dust to form around her like a jacket. But then she remembered that all that was left of her ability was a few pinches of dust. Her body continued to shiver. She can't take this cold for long. Not only that, but the low oxygen in here made her feel a little bit nauseous and dizzy. It was as if she was hiking at the top of a mountain. Don't be a stranger, Michael shouted. Sit by the campfire or you'll get frostbite. She bit her lips, conflicted. There was still some stubbornness inside her about wanting to become independent and self-reliant. But the cold, freezing temperatures of the environment forced her to reconsider. You can have this campfire for yourself if you want. I'll just go inside the house, he told her. She quickly held up her hands. No, it's fine. I'll sit by the fire. She slowly inched closer to the wooden log next to the fire. I'm just temporarily borrowing your campfire. I'll pay you back some other time. She said, her head turned away from Michael. Is this what people call it, tsundere? He asked himself. You know, you can just say thank you. Rena remained quiet and didn't reply. With the fire crackling, the two spent a few minutes in silence as their bodies warmed. Why did you save me? She asked him, her eyes downtrodden and looking at the fire. You could have just escaped by yourself. Michael shrugged. It looked like you needed saving. Rena made a self-deprecating chuckle. I was the one that attacked you first, yet you still saved me. Let me ask you this. Why do you want Spice Vice to become part of the major factions? She thought he was joking for a second. Isn't it obvious? It's because I want our company to succeed. And then what happens after that? He asked her again. What do you want to achieve? His question left her speechless. In her pursuit of greatness, she had never once asked herself why she was doing what she was doing. She just focused on grinding, making herself better than before. And because of her efforts, she was able to make Spice Vice become part of the Rising Six. But if she was going to be honest with herself, she had no clue why she was doing this. I don't know. She muttered out. Well, I started my company because I wanted people to become comfortable. I wanted to create inventions that would improve the lives of everyone in this world. If I had let you die just because I wanted to win in the auction, then it would violate the very reason why I'm doing this in the first place. Rena looked up and looked at Michael. She saw the genuinity in his eyes. It wasn't the naive and innocent eyes that she had expected from a kid like him. Instead, she saw seriousness and dedication in his gaze. It was at that moment that her vision of Michael completely changed from a kid who didn't know what he was doing to a man who knew exactly what he wanted to do and would do everything he can to achieve it. Is something wrong with what I said? Michael asked her, wondering why she was staring. Rena's cheeks blushed before she quickly averted her gaze and completely turned her head away from him. What am I doing? Stupid father. He's the one who put all of these ideas in my head. Chapter 547. Searching the worm's stomach. Bonus. It was an unfortunate timing that her father's words rang inside her mind. It's your chance to grab his heart, daughter. Take it. Rena slapped her own head to get rid of those silly thoughts. Just because her opinion of Michael changed didn't mean that she was ready to marry him or that he was ready to marry her. Are you okay? Do you need some oxygen? Michael asked her, inching closer to her to inspect. She quickly scooted away from him and waved her hands no. I'm fine. I'm fine. You can just stay there. Michael was only worried because he noticed that the oxygen in the environment was getting dangerously low. It would explain why Rena was acting so weirdly. He needed to make something that could help her breathe. He then raised his hand and created a magic circle in his palms. As mana flowed through his veins and into the circle, an invisible wave of energy propagated outwards. This was a simple search spell, one intended to find specific elements somewhere around the soil. The waves would bounce back as visible light once it found what he wanted to find. Soon enough his vision was filled with glowing patches of rock and soil that illuminated the worm's dark stomach. He was a little bit worried that there weren't enough materials, but thankfully the worm swallowed deep enough underground to contain all the specific metals he needed, like copper and zinc. Rena finally looked up and saw him using complicated magic spells to form and bend the minerals into two thin cylinders, one made out of copper and the other made out of zinc. What are you doing? She asked him. Michael smiled. These are called electrodes. Once those electrodes were done, he just needed two more ingredients. One was water, which was easily done through a simple water ball spell. The other was an acid liquid, which was plenty inside the worm's stomach. So combining all those things together, Michael was able to make a makeshift water electrolysis, which was able to make oxygen that can be breathed in for the time being. He made a simple breathing mask using wood and connected it to a metal tank via leaf straws. The tank contained the water electrolysis contraption, which allowed it to be filled with oxygen gas that can be breathed in using the mask. Here, try this on, he said, leaning towards her. What are you? Rena was flustered and became unable to run away from Michael's mask. Breathe. Although he was giving her instructions on how to use the mask, she couldn't quite make out what he was trying to say because her thoughts were filled with erratic arguments with herself. She was trying to deny the words that her father had been telling her all this time. Finally she had enough and instinctively took a big breath. And as soon as she felt the clean, fresh air in the mask, her head immediately cleared. It was as if she regained consciousness for the first time in a long time. She now held the mask all on her own and kept breathing it in. Breath. What is this? Breathe. That's called an oxygen mask. The reason why you're feeling so dizzy inside this place is because it doesn't have enough oxygen. With that tank, you'll have no problem breathing again. It's okay to ask for help once in a while. It doesn't make you any less of the woman you are now, he told her. Rena didn't know what he was talking about, but the results were clear. She didn't feel like she'd pass out at any second anymore. She couldn't help but look at Michael in amazement. Not only was he a genius in the mystic arts that can control 4 elements at once, but he was also a genius in invention and innovation. He was even able to make such a life-changing machine with only a limited amount of materials. This thing is really useful for people living in a higher altitude. I'll probably create a new product for them in the future so that they don't get oxygen deprived, he said, blurting out his ideas. This is amazing. You're amazing, she muttered out. Thanks. Now you can stay here while I go and find something out there. Rena immediately grabbed his arm. What are you talking about? I want to come with you. Michael thought about going alone, but it wouldn't hurt to have a companion around to help him. Are you sure? I think it's much safer here. But no matter what he said, she was determined. I thought you didn't want to be my ally or my friend. What changed your mind? Do you think I'm cooler now? He asked, joking. What? No. Rena began inhaling the oxygen mask at a faster pace. Relax, I was joking. Let's go. He began jumping through the different floating islands of the worm's stomach. Rena followed closely behind him, holding her wooden mask close to her mouth. Eventually they reached a huge pile of trash as big as a small mountain in the worm's stomach. It was made out of slightly decomposed wood, soil, and other natural ingredients that the worm swallowed in its lifetime. There were also some few bits and pieces of armor, clothes, and weapons that the worm probably ingested a few years ago. Despite the large heap, Michael felt the call in his heart grow deeper as he looked at this mountain. It's here. He quickly ran towards the heap and began rummaging through it. What are you trying to find? Rena asked him. And even though she didn't have to, she got her hands dirty and helped Michael search for whatever it was he was trying to search for. It's close. He closed his eyes and let his body get a feel for the item's location. He let his own body move towards it, keeping himself in full concentration. Using magic, he moved thousands of kilograms of decomposing wood and soil. Still, the sheer size of the mound left a lot of places left to search. Eventually, he did find something. In the distance, he saw something peeking out of the soil. Its distinct white color made it easy to spot among the black and brown mulch that composed this small mountain. He quickly picked it up and dusted off the soil around it. It was an oval shape with a mouthpiece and several evenly spaced holes along its frame. He recognized it to be an ocarina. An instrument? That's what was calling me? But upon closer inspection he realized that this wasn't just a simple instrument. It was a mithril relic. He didn't expect to see such a unique remnant of the past. Does this mean that the worm is thousands of years old? Of course, the ocarina could have also been left behind by a modern human just a few years ago. His curiosity led him to gently blow on the mouthpiece. And although he knew he wasn't good at playing musical instruments, he still expected some kind of note to play when he blew on it. Instead, he just heard nothing. I guess it deteriorated, but it was at that moment that the whole worm started to tremble. Chapter 548. Ocarina. Bonus. If the earthquakes induced by the colossal worm were bad, then the earthquakes inside the worm were even worse. Michael even almost lost his balance, which was quite a rare instance. What's happening? Rena panicked. The worm's moving. And just like he said, they felt a tremendous amount of force pushing them forwards, as if they were in a car that went from 0 kilometers per hour to 100 kilometers per hour in a few seconds. The acceleration caused him and everything else to be propelled backwards and up the worm's digestive tract. Hold on, he said, grabbing Rena from midair and keeping her close. His absolute unity defense would protect them from any debris that, like them, were getting accelerated to a velocity equal to that of a high-speed train. Eventually, he saw a large opening in the distance which was letting out a huge amount of light from the sun. He braced himself as the worm broke through to the surface and shot them out of its mouth, regurgitating all that it ate for the past few hours. Michael and Rena flew through the air with the worm's stomach acid following them from behind. Now that he had access to an abundance of mana in the air, he quickly used his shadow teleportation skill to move him and Rena out of harm's way. A huge shadow enveloped both of them and transported them back into solid ground just as a huge piece of boulder shot out of the worm's mouth. Michael laid on the ground with Rena on top of him and still clutching his clothes for safety. It's okay now. Rena opened her eyes and looked around, noticing that they were finally out of the worm and back over ground. You did it. She cheered and smiled at Michael, only to realize that she was still directly on top of him. Her face slowly turned tomato red down from her neck up to her forehead. She was heating up so much that her head was starting to smoke. And finally, as if all the pressure built up had exploded, Rena completely disappeared and reappeared directly behind a tree, still blushing. Michael stood up, wondering why she was acting so weird when there was plenty of oxygen in the air. Grew. He heard a low-tone growl coming from the colossal worm itself. And if he was seeing it right, it was as if the worm was looking directly at him when it growled. A few seconds later, the worm turned around and submerged itself back below the surface. Was it because of the ocarina? He took out the ocarina mithril relic out of his pockets and observed it under normal light. When he played this, the worm suddenly got the urge to vomit them out. That wasn't a coincidence. However, he didn't see any kind of magic imbued in the instrument, so he found it hard to understand how it could have created that kind of a reaction from the worm. I guess I'll keep this with me for now. He then turned to Rena, who looked like she had finally calmed herself down. So, what do we do now? Rena cleared her throat. I think we should separate for now. I promise I won't try to fight you again. I'll just wait for my teammates to get the keys. Of course, one of the reasons why she wanted to separate from Michael was because she was afraid that she would start liking him more and more. That can't happen. After all, they were still competitors in this auction. I guess it's goodbye then, Michael said to her. He didn't mind not being allies with Rena because that meant that he could use his drone freely. He felt much more at ease when he was using his drone vision and overlooking the entire map. That way he could see everything with a third-person perspective. Also, he wanted to spy on the other players in the game. By now there must have been some fights or altercations just like he had with Rena. He hoped that he would be able to get a glimpse of their ability and plan accordingly so that he'd be prepared when he fought with them. While he was thinking about all of this stuff, Rena slowly walked away from him. And although she was the one who suggested they separate from each other, she couldn't help but look back at Michael. Even now she was hesitating whether she should just stick with him or keep on going by herself. On one hand, pairing up with Michael meant that they'd have a much better chance of winning the drops compared to others. She also thought that the only way that they could beat someone like Bo was if they teamed up on her. However, her own stubbornness led her to keep walking forwards and separating from Michael. Meanwhile, now that Michael was all alone, he sat down in a secluded corner of the forest and took out his drone once again. With a simple push, the container popped out and allowed him to put on the glasses for the drone vision. Once he put it on, he found himself piloting the drone itself. The propellers roared as he commanded it to move upwards, raising up to the very skies. Immediately he scanned the area. He noticed that there were signs of fighting all around the map. There were huge patches of land where the forest had completely been balled. The lingering mana in the air allowed him to see the intensity at which they fought. This power could have only come from Bo, hailed as the strongest of the Rising Six. I missed it, he thought. He would have loved to see what kind of ability she had. He eventually set his sights onto another part of the map. This time he was able to see two distinct light mana signatures facing off against each other. They're fighting. He moved his drone closer towards them, but still making sure that he was at an appropriate distance to where they couldn't hear his propellers. Once he was completely overhead, he finally saw their faces. One man was wearing a leather cowboy hat and all the swagger that came with it. The other one was wearing matching khaki pants and a shirt. If I can recall, the cowboy is called Reptar and he's from the Crocodile Leather Company. Then that means that the one opposite him is his supposed rival Erlos from the Alligator Company. Their postures were very tense, as if they were just waiting for one of them to move before all hell broke loose. He was even tempted to just shoot a unity gun at them to make them start fighting. It would be better for the two of them to take each other out because they were ranked 3rd and 4th in the Rising Six. But no matter how much Michael waited, the two kept standing still as if waiting for the perfect moment. And then suddenly both of them turned their heads at the same time. They were looking at someone in the distance. Michael panned his drone to look at what they were looking at. As it turned out, they were staring at none other than Rena herself, who had just stumbled onto their positions. Chapter 549. Rena's Realization. Meanwhile, looking from above, Barnaby pointed at the three-way standoff that was happening in the game. "Look what we have here, folks. Rena has just stumbled upon the confrontation between Reptar and Erlos. Now we know from the history of their companies that they are long-standing rivals. Who will win? Will the crocodile prove himself to be the apex predator? Or will his nemesis alligator come out on top? Or maybe we'll see the underdog win." Rena herself has proven to be quite capable when dealing with the other magnetics, given the versatility of her red dust. Rena, noticing that their stares were directed at herself, slowly walked out of the bushes and into the clearing. She had her hands up, indicating that she had no intention of interfering in whatever they were doing. "I'm just passing by," she said. "I don't want to interrupt your fight." She then slowly backed away from them, intending to go back the way she came. The two looked at her and smiled. "Oh, you don't have to go away. You're not interrupting us," said Reptar, fixing his cowboy hat. "In fact, we were just about to come look for you," Erlos said. It was at this point that Rena noticed that Erlos' khaki shorts and shirt were completely spotless. They weren't tattered from a brutal fight, nor was it stained with dirt or blood. It was speckless. This immediately came off as a red flag to her. She knew that whenever Reptar and Erlos met each other, there would always be some sort of confrontation between them. They were rivals through and through. One would always try to best the other. But this time something was different. They weren't facing each other like enemies. They were facing her as if she was their enemy. You're working together," she realized. Reptar stomped his foot on the ground with the spurs on his cowboy boot making that rolling sound. "Correctamundo." Rena defensively lowered her posture immediately. There was nothing good about the two rivals settling their conflict and working together. "You know, Rena, we realize that we stand a better chance to win the Sudrops if we put all of our energy from fighting one another to fighting all the others," Erlos said, walking cautiously towards her, as if he was approaching a wild animal and trying not to spook it. "You understand us, right? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, there's no way that we're ever going to defeat Bo by ourselves. Sometimes we need to team up." Rena had her hands behind her back, slowly reaching for her scimitars. The remaining speck of red dust in her body slowly gathered around her palms, ready to be used. "Now you want to eliminate me," she said to them, scoffing. Reptar tipped his cowboy hat to her. No, not yet. We've known each other for way too long. We're planning to defeat that guy from Reborn. We're better off starting with the weakest first, no offense to him." Erlos agreed. "It's just the smartest move we can make. We don't have anything against the guy. We even commend him for how he had performed in the auction. But let's face it, this is a competition, not a friendly meeting. Someone has to be eliminated one way or the other, and we just don't want it to be us." Rena gritted her teeth. Knowing that they were targeting Michael, she tried not to look back in his direction. "Then you should let me leave and I'll let you guys be," she lied. She was going to go back and warn Michael what they were planning. "Come on, Rena. We know you met with the boy. We know you fought against him. That's the reason why we're even here in the first place," Erlos admitted. "Just tell us where he is and you can go on your way." If she told them where he was, then she could hold on to the game for much longer. There could even be a chance for her teammate on the other side to find a key and allow her to take one of the drops in the glass dome. This was what she wanted. She told herself that she would do anything she could to get Spice Vice into the major factions. And the way to do that was to betray Michael. "We didn't even say we're allies, so I won't be betraying him," she reasoned. But no matter what she tried to think, she couldn't bring herself to move. Just then she remembered what Michael said to her in the worm's stomach. "I'm doing this to make people feel comfortable." His words were like a bolt of lightning in her mind. What was she doing this for anyway? She only started working on her father's company because she treasured her late mother's memory of cooking with spices. Because of that, she wanted other people to feel as happy as she did when cooking with spices. That was the reason why she was doing this. She wasn't doing this because she wanted to become part of the major factions. She just wanted her spices to spread love and joy throughout the world. And with this breakthrough, Rena knew what she had to do. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you do that." The two looked at her surprised. They thought that she'd have no problem telling them Michael's location. That's fine, Erlo sighed. We'll just look for him ourselves. The two of them slowly walked in the direction from where she and Michael separated. And just as they walked past her, they suddenly stopped in their tracks. Are you serious? Reptar asked, grabbing his cowboy hat. You're really doing this? Erlos looked down at his legs and saw that a string of red dust was lassoed near his ankle, preventing him from moving. If he did, then he'd have to say goodbye to his feet. Reptar was in a similar situation, forcing both of them to stop. You could have played in the game for a little while longer if you had just gone on your way, silently, Erlos said, taking out a whip from his waist and snapping it in the air. Reptar turned around and faced Rena. It's not usually my style to hit a lady, but this is a game. So I'll have to ask for your forgiveness later, milady. Immediately a projection of a tremendous alligator head appeared above Reptar, its teeth bared and ready to chomp at anything. His mithril relic gauntlets glowed with a dark green energy as he used both of his hands and chomped down on the red dust string tied around his ankles. A projection of a crocodile's jaws coincided with his arms and bit down onto the string, which immediately broke off and dispersed into pure red dust. However, even those red dust were soon crushed into smithereens as Reptar's gauntlets went for another bite. Rena gritted her teeth. Her small collection of red dust had depleted even more. She should have known. He was in the 5th stage of body formation after all. She'd have trouble fighting against him if he was alone. But then she also had to worry about Erlos, who was in the peak 4th stage. But despite the obvious disparity in strength, Rena still held strong. She had to stop them from finding Michael. Chapter 550. Rena's Stubbornness. Meanwhile, the crowd were in uproar over the new developments in the game. Oh my god! The two rivals are working together. That's very unexpected, but it kind of makes sense. The only way that they can contend with Bo is if they fight her together. But I kind of feel sorry for Rena. She just survived from being swallowed by the colossal worm. And now it looks like she's in even much deeper trouble. She's already used most of her energy fighting Michael. And now she'll have to fight the number 3 and number 4 in the Rising 6. Everyone knew that she would lose immediately once they fought against each other, which was why the obvious action that Rena should take was to simply run away from them as fast as possible. With Rena's abilities, she'd find it easier than others to escape from this situation. That was what they thought was going to happen. But instead of running away, she instead insisted on fighting with the two of them for no apparent reason. What's she doing? She should run away now. Is she planning on fighting them? For what? Now that I think about it, Reptar and Erlos Obolites perfectly complement each other. Even Bo would have to be careful with it. Rena took out both of her scimitars and rushed towards the Erlos, the weakest of the two. She knew that she had a chance to triumph against them if she could defeat him first and deal with Reptar another time. She jumped in the air, twirling her body to create that signature spinning blade that would shred anything it touched. In response, Erlos raised his whip and swung it above his head. And after waiting for a specific moment in time, he snapped the whip towards her direction. And as the whip hit Rena's spinning blades, something unexpected happened. Rena felt her momentum completely stop in the air. Surprised, she looked at her scimitar and saw that Erlo's whip had wrapped itself around its blades. With such a flimsy weapon, everyone would have thought that the whip would simply get shredded into a million pieces. However, that whip wasn't just a normal weapon. It was a mithril relic, and one that was powered by Erlo's ability. The skeletal jaws of a long-nosed alligator appeared on top of Erlo's head. This skeleton was much different from normal alligators, as its teeth perfectly fit together, leaving behind no gaps nor holes when it was clamped together. Rena looked at her blades and saw that a miniature skeletal jaw had clamped itself on her scimitar. And no matter how much she tried to move her scimitar, it wouldn't budge at all. Just then Erlos yanked the whip back towards him, carrying Rena and her scimitar blades with it. Rena prepared one of her blades, taking this as a chance to enter close quarters combat with Erlos. But it was at this moment that she realized that on the corner of her eyes Reptar had quietly moved into place and was ready to intercept her. Reptar's two hands were openly positioned as if it was a crocodile's jaws, just waiting to crush anything that came near it. She immediately aborted her plans and tried to cut off the whip that tied her weapon. Her blades clanged as it smashed into the leather whip. Just then the skeletal alligator appeared and created a protective field around its whip itself, as if the whip was its own body. This was Erlo's ability. Nothing could escape his grasp as long as those skeletal alligator heads had attached itself to them. It didn't matter if she had the strongest and sharpest weapons in the world, she still wouldn't be able to get his grip off of anything. She continued to get pulled in closer and closer towards Reptar's jaws. If she got within his strike zone, then she'd find herself completely vulnerable. Finally, she gathered a little bit of her red dust and commanded them to coat the edge of one of her scimitar blades. With this addition, she sliced towards the whip again. This time, her three-headed diva woman imbued power into her weapon and fought against the power of the skeletal alligator. The two clashed, giving off an invisible shockwave before the alligator found itself unable to hold on. It finally let go of her scimitar, slinking back into Erlo's whip handle. However, it was just a little too late, as her momentum was forcing her to fall directly where Reptar's gauntlets were positioned. Having no choice, she braced herself and crossed her scimitars into a defensive position. As soon as she crossed the invisible threshold distance between her and Reptar, the gigantic crocodile diva's eyes lit up yellow before chomping down with such great intensity and force that it created a visible shockwave around her. This was Reptar's ability. Anything that came close enough to his strike zone would get crushed. It didn't matter if it was the most durable material in the world. They would still get crushed into a pancake. Reptar's gauntlets closed onto Rina, but not before using her two scimitars to block it from above and below. She gritted her teeth, feeling the immense amount of force that was put onto her scimitars. It was getting more and more powerful as she stayed under his jaws. Despite the force bearing down on her, she refused to give up. However, Reptar's crushing power was just too strong. Cracks resounded out of her scimitars as it started to fracture under the weight. Even her mithril relic weapons couldn't handle his power. Indignant, she used the rest of her remaining red dust to patch the cracks in her scimitars, hoping that it would give her more time to get out of the situation all on her own. However, even her red dust was starting to fail her. The jaws were starting to pulverize her dust into nothingness. Even her three-faced diva was starting to feel the pressure. She was starting to bend her neck as if an imaginary crocodile had her by the head. Unable to hold on, Rina was forced to let go of her grip on her weapons and jump away into safety. Once they no longer had the protection of her three-faced diva, the scimitars became just like any other normal weapon in the world. Reptar closed his gauntlets onto the scimitars, crushing them into a million pieces, with its fragments turning into nothing but powder in the air. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," Reptar said, turning his gauntlets over and letting the powdered scimitar fall to the ground. "You should surrender now so you don't have to get hurt anymore," Erlos advised. The two of them started walking away from her. Now that she had no mithril relic, she had no more access to her abilities. However, before they could even take another step back, they felt Rina rushing towards them with a sharp rock she found on the ground. "Why are you being so stubborn? Is it because of that boy? Why are you protecting him?" She didn't respond and just rushed towards them with crazy eyes. "I don't want to do this, but if you continue to pester us, then I'll have no choice but to completely knock you unconscious." Reptar raised his hands and conjured the crocodile jaws into his arms. And in this vulnerable moment, Rina couldn't help but utter out, "Help!" Chapter 551. Fairness Denied. Just as Reptar was going to chomp down onto the unguarded Rina, a rustling bush echoed out into the forest and alerted them of an incoming individual. They looked cautious, wondering if a certain curly blonde woman had finally found them and was about to hunt them down. They looked at the shoes and saw that it was far too small for Bo to wear. And as this person finally revealed themselves, they realized that they got half of their guess right. The person was blonde, but it wasn't Bo. It was Michael. When Rina looked up and saw him, her heart stopped. Why is he here? She had been fighting Reptar and Erlos exactly so that Michael could run away from them in time. Did he not hear them fighting? Instead, he came here right where they wanted him. Why? She muttered out in defeat, thinking that everything she did was for nothing. Michael looked at her. "You asked for help." "I'm here," he said with a natural tone, as if it was the normal thing to do in this situation. Rina and others couldn't believe what they heard. He was also going to suffer a defeat just because Rina asked for help? It didn't make sense at all. "You shouldn't have come here," Michael said. "Erlos. We were going to hunt you down, but seeing as how much Rina wanted to protect you, we wanted to at least honor her wishes and let you continue with the game a little bit longer." Michael shrugged. "It's fine. I'm not just here to help Rina, I'm here to avenge her." Seeing the confidence and bravado that Michael said those words, Reptar, Erlos, and the other people watching from above were stunned into silence. "Just to let you know, I am in the 5th stage of body formation. And Erlos is in the 4th stage," warned Reptar. He was trying to tell Michael that just their individual strengths alone would be enough to defeat him. And once they worked together, then he would most probably become exactly like Rina in the end. They could have stood a chance if they had fought together from the start, but now Rina was completely out of the game. She didn't have her mithril relic weapons nor her ability red dust. If he wanted to fight them, then it was already too late. Everyone thought this was obvious. But from Michael's confidence, it seemed that he didn't believe them. After all, he didn't say he was going to escape or that he was going to escape with Rina. He said that he was going to avenge her, meaning that he would defeat both of them in the same fashion that they defeated Rina. "I can't believe you said that. Now my pride won't allow me to let you go," said Reptar, as he slapped his gauntlets together with the giant crocodile above him roaring in anticipation. "Wait, Reptar. He's just a kid. Maybe he doesn't even know what he's talking about. Let's just let him go," said Erlos. Michael shook his head. "Nope. Come on. Let's fight. Me versus the two of you." Reptar and Erlos looked at each other, not knowing what to do. They knew that this was just a game and that there was nothing personal in it, but this was a challenge that they couldn't pass up. Their pride was on the line. "You can't blame us if we go hard on you," warned Reptar. "You asked for it. I'll step away for now. Let you have a fair fight, suggested Erlos. Nope. You didn't give that same courtesy to Rena. Why? It's because you respect her strength. You see her as someone that you need to defeat. Does that mean that you think you can defeat me just by yourselves? Michael asked, a bit offended. At this point, Erlos and Reptar didn't know what to do. They were giving Michael all the excuses he could have, but he just wouldn't accept it. They just didn't know why he was that confident. They sensed his fight against Rena a while back. And from their estimation, he was also in the 4th stage of body formation. If he was in the 6th stage, then they would have accepted his confidence. But he wasn't. In fact, I'll let you guys have the first strike. You're Erlos, right? You use your whip on me and drag me in towards Reptar. What is Michael thinking? Why didn't he just run away? Not only does he want to fight the two of them at the same time, but he also wants to give them the first strike. Is he crazy? He can just say surrender and he'll be escorted out of the pocket dimension safely. I just don't understand. Reptar's crunch ability will work on anyone that is below the 5th stage. There's nothing that it can't crush. Literally. Everyone was rooting for Michael, but all of his decisions at this point seemed like he was purposefully sabotaging himself. Reptar and Erlos were even gracious enough to fight him one-on-one. But no. He chose to fight them together. Unfortunately, no matter how much they screamed, Michael and the others wouldn't be able to hear them. So when Reptar began to position his gauntlets like that of a crocodile's jaws, they braced themselves for a quick defeat. Erlos began swinging his whip around with the skeletal alligator skull slithering like a snake above him. Finally, he cracked it towards Michael. The whip elongated just enough to reach his whips and wrap around him tightly. The image of the elongated nose of the alligator manifested around the rope as if it had Michael locked in its jaws. With a single tug, Michael was pulled forwards with enough force to make him fly a few feet above the ground. His hands were still caught under the whip, making it that much harder to escape the whip's grip. Just a mere 10 meters away from him was Reptar, who had his gauntlets ready to chomp on his body and crush his bones. As he continued to fly into their trap, willingly the audience above were biting their nails with worry. Even though Michael was already on the halfway mark, there was still a carefree look on his face and no indication that he was actually trying to break free. He's not moving? He's not moving. Why isn't he panicking? Does he think that Reptar's gauntlets are a joke? I don't think he's planning on attacking at all. As Michael reached the threshold of Reptar's ability, the giant crocodile diva manifested itself around the gauntlets and readied itself for a meal. Not even a blink of an eye later, the jaws closed in on Michael with a force and speed unexplainable to physical and magical terms. Everyone closed their eyes, not wanting to see the brutality that was about to unfold. But a few seconds later, nothing happened. The sound of bones breaking and flesh shredding was nowhere to be heard. They finally opened their eyes only to see an impossibility in front of them. The crocodile's teeth were just a few inches away from Michael's body, but it stopped there as if frozen in time. Chapter 552. Switch. What? A mixture of what's hows and impossibles rang out from the crowd. It was as if they were looking at a frozen screen with all of the players paused for an eternity. Erlos was stunned into silence, unbelieving of what had happened. He was staring at Reptar, who was stuck in place with his expression frozen at the moment when he activated his ability and chomped down at his prey. He was so shocked that even his diva couldn't help but copy his movements. The alligator jaws slightly opened as if shocked just as well as Erlos. The whip turned loose, allowing Michael to free himself from its grasp. Now that he was free, he grabbed onto the whip and pulled as hard as he could at Erlos. Still in a state of shock and unable to understand what has happened, Erlos got forcefully tugged towards Michael. And as Michael used an air spell to propel him outwards, Erlos got pulled in even more with his feet already off the ground and traveling just as fast as Michael. Because he was so used to being the one to pull other people towards him, Erlos completely forgot to let go of the whip itself and got taken directly where Michael wanted him to be. And when Erlos finally came to his senses, he realized that he was already directly in the jaws of Reptar's gauntlets with its teeth bearing down above and below him. Before he knew it, they just exchanged positions. He was now the one in trouble of being crunched by the crocodile's jaws. He quickly used his whip and cracked it towards the nearest tree, hoping to pull himself off of this dangerous situation. But it was at that moment that a click resounded throughout the silent forest. Reptar turned unfrozen and his gauntlets continued on towards its original trajectory. The crocodile diva chomped on its target with the satisfying feeling of bone and flesh being crushed with stupendous amounts of force. Ah! Erlos screamed. His entire left stomach was directly in the gauntlet's jaws. He wasn't able to escape fast enough. Ha 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 ha! This is the power of my crocodile Michael. Reptar bragged with the high of a successful hunt still lingering in his mind. Clap, clap, clap. Michael leaned on a tree to the side and applauded Reptar's ability with genuine praise. Ooh, that's pretty good. I can see how nobody will be able to get away from that unscathed, he said to Reptar. Finally, Reptar noticed Michael in front of him. Confusion filled his face, wondering how he came out uninjured from the crocodile's jaws so fast. Was it a clone that he ate? Ah! Let go of me, you buffoon. Reptar looked down and realized that it wasn't Michael who was in his jaws but Erlos. He quickly retracted his gauntlets, letting Erlos fall to the ground, bleeding from the giant gator bite mark on his left stomach. What happened? In his perspective, everything had happened instantaneously. At the moment when he activated his ability, Michael was the one in his jaws. Yet, when he completed his crunch, it was suddenly Erlos who he had bitten. It was then that he felt something fall out of his arms. The iron switch that had been attached to him dropped to the ground and rolled a bunch of times before it came to a stop. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that this was none other than Michael's power. His ability. The two glowing metallic arms above his head proved it. That's your diva, Reptar groaned. Erlos, holding his injured torso, got up and looked at Michael's strange ability. He had used it to stop Reptar's body entirely, as if he was frozen in time. A time-stop power that was for certain. But the thing that other people still couldn't believe was that it was somehow able to overpower Reptar's diva even though they were one stage apart. The crowd, including the other major factions watching this, were perplexed. That shouldn't work, said Bobby as he leaned forward, his eyes locked on the iron switch Michael used. Reptar's diva should have asserted its dominance over a weaker diva. Dickie could only nod. That's also what happened the last time that I saw Michael fight. He was able to defeat someone one stage above him. Every single magnetic in the crowd, even the ones at the very top, were left wondering how Michael was able to do what he did, with the normal folk even more confused. That metal thing is his ability, right? I didn't even see him use it. His hands were clearly tied up by the whip. I can swear that I didn't see his arm move even once. I think I saw it. There was a blur at the moment it happened, as if that metal block was shot out from a far distance. Meanwhile, Reptar didn't care one bit about how Michael was able to do what he did. What only mattered was his defeat. Wishing to right what he did wrong, Reptar raised his gauntlet jaws and chomped at it towards Michael. And in an instant, Reptar disappeared and reappeared right in front of Michael. He literally crunched the space between them and instantly nullified their distance. Reptar opened his gauntlet jaws again to crush Michael, but that momentary reload of his ability allowed Michael to jump away at the very last second. TSK. Erlos, can you fight? Reptar looked back. Erlos gritted his teeth before using his hands to clamp on the injury in his stomach. A figure of the skeletal long-nosed alligator appeared in his fist and bit down onto the injury. In an instant, his wounds stopped bleeding. This was one of the good things about his ability. It allowed him to minimize blood loss. I can handle it, Erlos said. My Godforge protected me from your bite, but at the cost of my stamina. Erlos gripped his whip and snapped it towards Michael. The rope elongated to try and catch him, but Michael conjured a solid earth ball and used it as his defense. The whip smashed through the earth ball and continued on its path towards Michael, but he already disappeared. Both of them looked up, eager to catch Michael. But then they saw something they never thought they'd see. Michael summoned not one, not two, not four, but 8 magic circles in the sky, all of which were glowing with their own colors. 8 element mastery. Both of them screamed out. In fact, it seemed that the entire auction crowd shouted the same exact thing when they saw Michael conjure up those magic circles. The only one that wasn't surprised was the Tower Master. So it was true, he muttered. That Cerberus bastard wasn't exaggerating a single bit when he talked about Michael. This kind of talent in the mystic arts was unprecedented. They thought it was tremendously overpowered for Michael to control 4 elements. But 8? That was way too unfair. Who is this kid anyway? Why haven't I heard of him before? Has he always had this mastery? And the fact that he can conjure up 8 magic circles means that his mana pool must be incredibly big. Chapter 553. Magic Animals. Each of the magic circles in the sky correspond to an element. From the water spell, Michael conjured a huge blob of water that slowly morphed into the shape of a hippopotamus. As for the fire spell, he conjured up a ball of flames that transformed into the shape of a tiger. For the earth spell, he chose a snake. And for the air spell, an eagle formed out from solid wind. Each one of those animals could be considered predators of a crocodile and an alligator. Their physiology was basically perfect to handle the 2 crocs he was fighting against. But of course, just having a single element wasn't enough. With the other 4 magic circles, he created pure elements that shot towards a specific animal. The hippo was imbued with the element poison. Its watery figure soon turned into violet sludge, allowing it to form a toxin that would poison anyone it touched. The tiger was positioned low, as if it was about to pounce on its target. But once it was added with the dark element, its body soon began to blend into the shade and darkness that the trees provided. As for the eagle, it was added with the light element. Its feathers began to ruffle before a few of them dropped out of its wings. As they slowly glided down, they slowly turned into a miniature eagle with the same magic intensity as the original. Last but not least, the snake was imbued with the lightning element. Electricity crackled around its slithery body, allowing it to lunge at speeds that would rival that of Thunderbolt. All four of these animals floated in the sky surrounding Michael. They all looked down at their prey, their bodies beginning to showcase some of their new powers. Reptar eyed the tiger with purpose. It was as if he saw a worthy adversary in the animal. He leapt into the air, converging onto the tiger. As his gauntlets clamped down onto the tiger, it suddenly disappeared into a black mist and got away from his grasp. Reptar chomped on the air and suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was back on the ground right next to the tiger, who had hidden itself within the shade. He punched towards the tiger right in its nose, with the animal recoiling from the power and losing some of the darkness element it had. With another punch, he sent the tiger flying upwards, where it would eventually come back down and land directly into his crocodile gauntlet's jaws. Just then Reptar felt the ground shake behind him as he saw the violet sludge hippo charging at him at insanely fast speeds. He jumped up and vaulted over the hippo. The animal skidded in the ground, trying to stop its momentum and turn around. But Reptar immediately charged forward and used his gauntlets to chomp at the hippo's backside. At this moment, the shadow tiger lunged at him from the side and bit his gauntlets. The tiger's shadow fangs tried to gnaw its way into the weapon, but despite its weathered condition, the mithril relic was still strong enough to withstand the bite. Reptar's body began to glow as he used his ability. The image of his crocodile appeared onto his fist and was biting down onto the tiger. And as he rotated his wrist with speed and power, his gauntlets suddenly turned into a rotating shaft that sped up to nearly 1,000 revolutions per second. His crocodile was doing the death roll maneuver. The shadowy tiger, despite being made out of the two intangible elements of shadow and fire, were immediately turned into pure mana as it got shredded into near oblivion. Reptar smiled, having conquered one of his predators. But then he felt a tremendous force pick him up from his torso. The hippopotamus had grabbed onto him, with its eyes filled with vengeance for its comrade. It charged at the nearest tree, hoping to bash Reptar's head into it. Reptar felt the weakness in his body as the poison from the hippo began to seep into his skin. The toxicity gave him a temporary weakness that allowed the hippo to slam his body into the tree, turning it into 1,000,000 splinters. But instead of getting hurt, Reptar became even angrier. He raised his hands together, forming the jaws of his crocodile diva. And in one swift movement he slammed his gauntlets together and crushed the hippo into a violet splatter. The force was enough to destroy the spell into pure matter, turning into nothingness. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Erlos grabbed his whip as one giant eagle and 4 mini-eagles haunted him from the sky. He ignored the pain in his abdomen and whipped one of the mini-eagles, snatching it from the air and bringing it back down into the ground with immense force. With another snap, he snatched another baby eagle from the skies and slammed it into a tree. And just as he was about to do it a third time, the big eagle swooped in and intercepted the whip's head. The skeletal alligator clamped into the bird before Erlos dragged it down with force. But instead of catching the entire eagle, they were only able to pluck a few feathers out from its skin. Erlos destroyed the few feathers he got, but some of them got away and turned into more mini-eagles for him to deal with. Wary of this ability from the eagles, Erlos decided to target the eagle's head where its feathers were at its thinnest. It was at that moment when electricity crackled and the electric snake pounced on Erlos' neck. Since the earth element was charged with lightning, the snake's speed gave Erlos no chance to dodge the surprise attack. The snake was able to pierce through his skin and deliver air into his bloodstream. This would give him an air embolism that was just as deadly as poison. Erlos grabbed the snake from his neck and clamped his hands onto its body. The skeletal long-nosed alligator manifested in his fingers just before he slammed the snake onto the ground, pinning it down permanently. It wouldn't be able to get out no matter how fast it was. The snake crackled with electricity and wind picked up like a tornado, but no matter what it did, it wouldn't be able to overpower an ability. Erlos then grabbed the snake bite on his neck, clamping onto the air that he had been injected with and pulling it out of his body safely. Just then the eagles finally found their moment and dived down into Erlos. Their wings created wind crescents behind them. And just as the moment when they were only a few inches away from him, they turned their wings and aimed the wind crescents at him. Erlos felt 20 wind crescents enter his body, cutting his skin and letting blood spurt out. Annoyed, he began to snap his whip continuously. And with each snap, a baby eagle would be snatched up and destroyed instantly from the very physics of the whip itself. After all, the end of a whip was so fast that it would surpass the speed of sound and create a supersonic shockwave. Chapter 554. Shots. Just as Erlos thought he'd had the upper hand, the air eagle shrugged its body so intensely that it essentially shed off all of its feathers in one go. And from those feathers thousands of baby eagles were born. Each one was as vicious as the one before it. All thousands of eagles swooped down into Erlos and targeted his entire body. None of his skin was left untouched, as they all created their masterpiece of work that turned Erlos into a red canvas. The original now bald eagle was even more intelligent than the others and targeted the injury on Erlos' stomach. Cock! Erlos groaned, feeling the intense pain shooting up his body as the eagle pecked at the bite mark on his stomach. Enraged, he swung his whip with speed and intensity. With each revolution, his velocity was getting faster and faster until it sounded like he turned into a helicopter. Using his ability, his skeletal alligator clamped down onto the very air in the environment and began to twist them along with the rotation of the whip. It wasn't long before wind picked up even more, allowing Erlos to create a tornado that picked up anything and everything in the surroundings. Not even trees were exempted from this force. The thousands of eagles tried to fly their way out of the tornado, but the current was simply too fast for them to overcome. They eventually got pulled back into the storm, forced to go with the flow of the tornado. This was the same for the bald eagle as well. It flailed its wings trying to gather the air mana in the air for its own use, but unfortunately the skeletal alligator from Erlos' whip snatched every single air mana in the environment. Even if it was a master of the sky, it was still unable to fight against the unreasonable power of an ability. On every layer of the tornado, Erlos' multiple skeletal alligators went in different directions, turning the entire thing into a giant blender that tore up anything unfortunate enough to get picked up. Feathers were turned into powdery paste. Mana was turned into pure energy. Everything was blended into a smooth texture. Erlos slowed his whip, eventually turning the tornado into a simple breeze. None of the eagles survived. Still, Erlos didn't come out unscathed. His whole body was covered in scratches, and his bite injury only worsened because of the bald eagle. He could barely stand up straight now because of how there was always a stinging pain that shoots up his entire body. To let off his steam, he slammed his foot onto the restrained snake in the ground, destroying it in one go. Once Erlos and Reptar dispatched of Michael's magic animals, it was now their turn to attack him. Erlos wrapped his whip onto Reptar's waist before using force to rotate his body around in the air like a ragdoll. This unorthodox method ended up allowing Reptar to reach speeds he wouldn't be able to reach by himself. And once he had gathered enough momentum, Erlos released the grip of his skeletal alligator and tossed Reptar towards Michael at insane speeds. With his gauntlets ready to bite down, he reached towards Michael and waited until he crossed the threshold. And to make sure he wouldn't be able to run away, Erlos shot his whip towards Michael and grabbed onto him with his ability. Now he can't use his immense mystical powers to get away. A magic circle appeared in front of Michael, conjuring a lion made out of fire and lightning, creating plasma. Reptar chomped down on the king of the jungle, destroying it with ease. It seemed as if no matter what kind of animal he used or what kind of element he paired it with, anything would be destroyed in front of Reptar's crocodile jaws. Everyone thought it would finally be over for Michael. That was Michael's only chance. He caught them off guard, but it just wasn't enough. Now they're thoroughly prepared for him. They no longer treat him as a kid, so now they're unapologetic in their union of power. Those two's abilities work together so well. Nobody would stand a chance against them if they turned serious. See how quickly they locked him down when they started working together. But it was just then that Michael raised his hand and simply pointed at Reptar. A bright white light shined on the tip of his finger as it gathered power through a single point. Reptar didn't know what he was doing, but he had a bad feeling about it from the start. He opened his gauntlet jaws even wider, hoping to bite on Michael before he finished whatever he was trying to do. He couldn't back away now, especially since Michael had nowhere else to go. And just as he was about to chomp down on Michael's finger, the beam arrived. A single unity gun fired off from his finger and hit Reptar directly in the chest. Numbness was the only thing Reptar could feel. But a few seconds later, the pain suddenly shot through his entire body, making him squirm. He looked down and saw a hole in his chest which was smaller than a fingernail. Blood was pulsating out of his body and slowly staining his cowboy attire red. If it wasn't for the Godforge pieces in his heart deflecting the bullet away from his heart, then he would have been dead by now. Arg! Blood dripped out of Reptar's mouth, which he wiped off immediately. Despite the pain, he knew that this was his chance to finally bite down on Michael. Whatever he did had to have needed more time to replenish. This meant that he'd still be able to finish the fight as long as Michael was stuck in front of him with no way to escape. Ignoring the piercing pain in his chest, he raised his trembling hands and created his crocodile's jaws. But it was at this moment that he saw the whip's grip loosening on Michael's waist. "No!" he muttered out, lunging at Michael and quickly trying to bite him once and for all. But at the very last second, Michael's body turned into a shadow and disappeared completely from his view. "No!" Reptar shouted in anger. Not only was he in deep pain from being shot in the chest, but he was also getting frustrated that Michael kept escaping from his grasp every single time. He immediately looked down and complained to Erlos about his sloppy work. "Why didn't you keep him steady?" But as he looked at Erlos, he saw that the man's chest was also bleeding just like his. Erlos was in deep pain, so much so that he couldn't even hold on to his whip anymore. This vulnerability was what allowed Michael to escape from Reptar's grasp. "You're hit too," Reptar realized. But how could that happen? He only saw Michael use one of those light things that hit him. He didn't have time to shoot down towards Erlos either. Even the eagle-eyed spectators from the crowd were unable to pinpoint that moment when Michael shot off two of those bright lights. Again with that, how does Michael keep on shooting stuff without any one of us seeing it? Just then a buzzing sound echoed through the forest. Chapter 555. Flying Metal Monster. The hovering object glowed as it gathered power in its barrel. And a moment later the brightness peaked and released a tremendous amount of unity energy towards Erlos. He tried to get away, cracking his whip towards the nearest tree and jumping away. But unfortunately for him, he didn't come out unscathed as the drone's unity gun shot off towards his leg and induced a temporary limp in his walk. After a successful hit, the drone flew away directly towards Michael, hovering in place just above his shoulders. Finally, everyone set their sights upon a metallic flying object. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Some even thought that it was a monster that somehow barged into their fight. That thing used the same spell that Michael used. So that's how he did that. What is it? Is it his tamed monster made out of metal? Or is it another one of his magical constructs? While the rest of the crowd were wondering about the drone, the Tower Master and the rest of the senior wizards of the Magic Tower were in complete disarray once they saw the Unity Gun that Michael used. As eternal students of the mystic arts, they immediately recognized the power of all 8 elements inside the Unity Beam. This was substantiated by the fact that they had just seen Michael command all of the 8 elements at ease. Tower Master, what is that beam? How could all 8 elements be able to coexist in the same space without creating a tremendous explosion? And I know he has an 8-element mastery, but his finger or his entire body should have been destroyed as soon as he used that beam. They all looked at the Tower Master, the most senior and most learned among them. Why are you all acting like we are experts in the physics of 8-element spells? We didn't even think this was possible in the first place. But Michael must have had his whole life to create and innovate new solutions that would make the impossible into the possible. There was curiosity in the Tower Master's face, completely enamored by the Unity Gun. We can get that, Tower Master. But how about that hovering object? How is it able to create a completely identical beam? Are we to assume that it also has an 8-element mastery? Not only that, but from what I can see, the metal object doesn't use any external magic to make itself fly. Tell me you can see something different, Tower Master. Unfortunately for them, the Tower Master had no answer for them. Its capabilities of flight are rooted in simple physics. We can see that the air is being displaced below it, allowing it to fly. As for how he was able to figure out the mechanics of how to do that, I am none the wiser. And as for its abilities to also use the beam, I am as clueless as you are. The wizards of the Magic Tower were not the only ones that were interested in Michael's Unity Beam and his drone. Alaric couldn't help but lean forward as he observed the progression of the battle. That beam is extremely powerful, he realized. It's fast, and it's enough to damage the natural defenses of the Godforge pieces in the heart. He saw how Reptar and Erlos barely had any time to react once that beam was shot. And even if they did anticipate it, they would find it hard to defend against it and come out unscathed. That alone makes Michael a terrifying opponent. But then, his eyes moved over to the hovering drone beside Michael. Its shape and its abilities were completely foreign to him. But in the end, that didn't matter. The only thing that Alaric took notice of was that it was moving as Michael willed it to. That flying metal monster of his. If it can also produce that terrifying beam, then he has essentially nullified Reptar and Erlos' numerical advantage. As surprising as it sounded, Alaric was now giving Michael a 50% chance of victory against those two. If he said this to himself a few minutes ago, he would have thought himself crazy. Reptar moved down and helped Erlos get back up to his feet. The two were injured and bleeding. In comparison, Michael barely had a scratch on his body. The progression of this fight was unlike anything they expected. Do you know what that is? Reptar whispered to Erlos. No, but it's the one that hit me in the chest, I'm sure of it, Erlos replied, massaging his wound. They both looked at Michael and the drone hovering next to him. The mystery behind that metal object was just as threatening as the man himself. Their eyes were now wary of the bright white light that would appear in Michael's finger. Once they saw that familiar glow, they would know to immediately run away. We can still win this, Erlos said. You attack him while I keep an eye on that thing of his. It'll be easy to destroy it once his attention is on you. Reptar nodded and fixed his cowboy hat. Now that he knew what to expect, he was sure that they could finally back Michael into a corner. He lunged towards Michael, his hands open in a tiger stance. 2 miniature crocodile heads appeared on his gauntlets, with both having their jaws open and ready to bite. While he did that, Erlos focused on the drone. He cracked his whip towards the hovering metal and intended to catch it with his skeletal alligator. However, the pain from his injuries flared up and ended up making him flinch. The whip missed and hit one of the tree's branches instead. Because of this, the drone was free to adjust its barrel and aim it at Reptar. A bright white light emerged from the drone, getting Reptar's attention. He quickly stopped in his tracks, skidding in the ground. Michael used this opportunity to create 2 magic circles at the same time. 2 magical koi fish, one made from light and poison mana and the other made out of dark and lightning. Both swam through the air and mirrored each other's actions before rushing towards Reptar. Reptar gritted his teeth and grabbed both koi fish with his gauntlets. The crocodile in his hands roared into action, twirling their bodies and creating their signature death roll. The koi fishes were shredded into pure energy. But it did its job. Reptar had no time to move out of the drone's line of sight and was just mere moments away from being hit. Just then Erlo's whip cracked towards Reptar and wrapped around his waist. The drone's gun shot towards Reptar's body, but not before Erlo's yanked him backwards and saved him from another bullet hole in the chest. But just when they thought that they were finally safe, they saw a bright white light on the corner of their eyes. They turned around only to see Michael's finger glowing with the power of unity just a few moments away from firing it. Chapter 556. Collision. Reptar and Erlos felt their hairs standing up on end after seeing the unity gun pointed at them. They both used their respective abilities to protect themselves. Erlos snapped his whip in front of him, with the whip's head stopping directly in the air. His skeletal alligator clamped not on the air but on reality itself. And with a simple tug he bent the space in front of him, allowing him to also bend the straight beam of light that would come towards him. On the other hand, Reptar used both hands to crunch the space around him, allowing him to teleport directly behind Michael to ambush him right after he finished casting his unity gun. Their strong abilities and their fast thinking allowed them to immediately come up with counters for Michael's beam, even though they'd only seen it a few times. However, the threat of the unity gun made them forget one simple thing. That wasn't just Michael's power. Erlos thought he was protected from the unity gun. But unbeknownst to him, the drone had already positioned itself above him. By the time he heard that buzzing sound from the propellers, it was already too late. He looked up only to see a small block of iron dropping from the drone and landing into his arm. Click! Michael's switch turned off his ability for a brief second. And that was all that was needed for reality to unbend itself from Erlo's grasp. The unity gun in Michael's hands shot off. And in that same moment, Erlos finally broke free from the freezing effect of Michael's ability. Erlos woke up just at the moment when the unity beam hit his torso. Kirk! He groaned, falling to his knees. Meanwhile, Reptar disappeared from his place and reappeared behind Michael. And in the moment Michael fired off his unity gun, he made his move. Reptar reared his arm back and punched Michael in the back of his head. The crocodile in his gauntlets had its jaws open wide, ready to perform another death claw that would literally shred anything into pieces. Just when he thought he'd gotten Michael once and for all, an invisible prismatic shield manifested above Michael's head and fought against Reptar's crocodile. The gauntlets clashed with the shield, creating sparks made out of mana. Eventually, the power of Reptar's diva overpowered the unity defense and tore through it for the first time. The gauntlets pushed through towards Michael's back, but with its power and speed significantly reduced. The tips of Reptar's fingers brushed with Michael's clothes, tearing it into shreds. However, Michael finally recovered from shooting the unity gun. His body quickly turned into a shadowy gas that escaped further injury from Reptar's gauntlets. Reptar stumbled forwards, his balance broken by his miss. He fell staring into the ground with a shocked and confused expression in his face. His crocodile should have torn through anything it touched. It was the rules of his ability. However, Michael's defensive shield was still able to withstand his gauntlets for a few moments. It may have only lasted for a brief second, but the fact that it was able to defend against an ability should have been impossible in the first place. While he was stunned, Michael conjured a magic circle beneath his feet. A giant fist made out of magma shot up and performed an uppercut on Reptar's entire body, flinging him up into the air. Since the spell was made out of fire and earth, those elements got imbued into his body. And right at the peak of his trajectory, Michael created another giant fist, this time made out of air and water. The second fist punched Reptar back into the ground, imbuing him with air and water mana. The combination of all those four elements created a mini explosion that blasted Reptar back into the ground with tremendous force and power. Reptar smashed into the ground with his body skidding through soil, rock, and trees before eventually colliding with Erlos. The two of them crashed into a giant boulder, cracking it into half. Meanwhile, Michael reappeared in the air and felt the wind on his back. Reptar was still able to graze him in the end, creating a large gash near his shoulder blades like he had just been in a motorcycle accident that shredded his back. Thankfully, though, it was only skin deep. Despite being injured, Michael felt very good about himself. Fighting against these two made him use his powers a lot more efficiently than before. He felt like he was improving. It was at that moment that a sound echoed around him. He quickly turned around, wanting to discern where it came from. This time he was sure that the sound didn't come from anywhere but his own head. What the? Am I hearing things again? He would have thought this was a coincidence, but this was the second time this happened. ChatJK4, is that you? Negative. I do not detect any sound noise in your environment. While Michael was occupied with this mysterious noise that he kept on hearing, Reptar and Erlos were trying to recuperate from their wounds. Ha! I can't hold on much longer, Erlos said, barely able to stand on his own. Each time he tried, the pain would make him fall down. I hate to admit it, but I'm nearing my limit too. My crocodile requires a lot of power to operate, and I've already used most of them in empty bites. Reptar looked at Michael and saw the boy still full of energy. If this goes on any longer, he's going to win. We have to do something drastic. Erlos looked at Reptar. He knew what he meant. Are you sure? We can only use it once. Look, I know we decided to use it on Bo. But we won't be able to fight her if we don't win against Michael now. Either we do this or we're out, Reptar argued. In the end, they both agreed that this was a do-or-die situation. With that last bit of strength they had, they stood up and faced Michael together. They stood up and manifested their diva. Erlo's skeletal long-nosed alligator head appeared, its teeth perfectly molded for catching things. Reptar's giant crocodile head manifested as well, with its mouth opened and ready to shred things into pieces. They closed their eyes, gathering the power in their godforged pieces to manifest more into the world. The images of their diva started to become bigger, fiercer, and overall became a lot more realistic. And then something strange happened. Their two divas started to bend and deform in nonsensical directions. The weird part was that both divas were contorting in the same exact way as each other. Suddenly a visible grayish-white aura appeared around Erlos and Reptar. It slowly rose up before enveloping their diva as well. As they concentrated more and more, this aura grew bigger and bigger until they started to overlap each other. And once the auras overlapped each other, it morphed into one single flare of aura that encased them both. Suddenly their two divas flew out of their respective positions and dove towards each other with speed and certainty. And upon collision, a shockwave of disturbance echoed outwards and brought everything to a standstill. Chapter 557. Synergize. Once the shockwave dissipated, everything settled down. But things weren't the same as before. Above Erlos and Reptar there was a figure of a giant crocodile with skeletal armor that wrapped around its head and modified its teeth to become even sharper and even more lethal than before. The two divas, the skeletal alligator and the giant crocodile, had now merged together into one amalgamation of each other's essences. Everyone couldn't believe their eyes. No way. Did they just successfully synergize with each other? That's impossible. They're not even crew members, let alone friends. They shouldn't be able to cooperate with each other with enough connection that their divas agreed to coexist with one another. It could also be that their divas are naturally synergistic with one another. We can see that their obolites fit well with each other. Everyone knew that synergy's a technique where two magnetics bond their divas together to mix their strengths together was incredibly hard to do. One would practically have to spend 10 years working together at least before they could synergize with each other. I thought they would lose to Michael. But with this synergy they're bound to win, literally. Who knew they had this technique in secret? They were probably saving it up to fight against Bo but ended up using it for Michael. They might have lost their numerical advantage, but now their strength is far above Michael's. The skeleton armor-wearing crocodile opened its jaws wide before snapping it with force and intimidation. Reptar and Erlos opened their eyes at the same time. One can see it in their expressions that they were getting ready for their final push. They were going to put all of their power into this last attack. They moved in sync as if they were acting as the same person. They charged towards Michael with their weapons ready to strike. And as they charged towards Michael, the synergy diva above them charged with them. The aura they gathered was powering the diva and allowing it to interact with the real world, with its gigantic body pushing through the trees and destroying the crowns. I didn't know combining divas was possible, Michael thought. He then raised his hand and powered up the unity gun in his finger. He closed one of his eyes and aimed directly at Erlos. Beside him his drone adjusted its barrel and aimed at the other half of the synergy Reptar. They fired the shot within a second, with the beam of unity shining towards the two at near instantaneous speeds. Just then the aura surrounding the synergy diva flared up and fought against the unity beam, crossing the barrier, slowing it down and weakening its power. The skeleton-armored crocodile uttered a guttural roar, using its synergy to give their respective owners more power. Reptar, with his empowered gauntlets, caught the unity beam with his hands and crushed it, entirely breaking the beam. Erlos snapped the whip towards the beam, cutting it from the source. For the first time they defended against the unity gun. With this renewed vigor they charged forwards. Their synergy diva opened up its jaws wide and started swallowing everything in its path. Trees were getting shredded into a million splinters, and the soil of the earth was getting pulverized at the same instant that they got near the visible aura surrounding the synergistic duo. They left a wake of a destroyed mess behind them, with Michael right on their sights. Michael backed away, using air propulsion at the soles of his feet. Unfortunately, the synergistic diva seemed to be eating up the space in between them just as fast as he was running away. He then conjured up 8 magic circles. 4 animals jumped out, each having 2 elements that synergized well with each other. A hippo, an eagle, a tiger, and a snake lunged towards the giant skeleton armor crocodile. Individually they clashed into the synergy's oppressive aura but were unable to pass through. But with Michael's intervention, the mana particles left behind by the animals connected with each other, creating a mixture of all 8 elements. And without the proper control and system that Michael imbued in them, the mixture quickly turned volatile, exploding into a giant discharge that would create a massive crater. But the giant Synergy Diva simply closed down its jaws and swallowed the explosion whole, destroying it before it had a chance to destroy. Urlos and Reptar kept charging towards Michael, thinking that victory was within their grasp. Michael reached down deep into his pockets and took out all of the switches in his inventory. Each of his fingers clasped a switch in between them. He threw them towards the Synergy duo. The switches became firmly attached to the aura of the giant skeleton-armored crocodile. They turned on briefly, making the Urlos and Reptar pause in their steps. But it lasted only for an instant. The switches were forcibly flicked outwards by the aura and continued towards their target. As Michael flew away, he kept throwing switches after switches, with none of them lasting more than a small instant before they were completely overpowered. And in that moment he felt that sound again. He didn't know why or how, but it was as if an idea was birthed into his head. It was like his instincts awakened a new idea. He stopped throwing switches and focused on controlling his drone. He willed it forward, taking the Synergy duo's charge head-on. Anyone and everyone who saw this were instantly baffled by his decision. Some couldn't even help but scream out towards Michael in the hopes that he would hear them. "What are you doing? Run away now. You already saw that nothing would stop the skeleton-armored crocodile from wreaking havoc. You won't be able to teleport away in time." In their minds, Michael was wasting his resources by throwing everything he had onto the diva. Synergy divas were a complete beast entirely. Their powers were way too large for him to overcome. However, despite their best efforts to persuade Michael, he remained steadfast in his decision. The drone hovered in the air, waiting for the Synergy diva to reach it. And at the moment that the aura reached the drone, the skeleton-armored crocodile viciously brought down its upper jaws and chomped on its prey. Its reinforced teeth bit down onto the drone, hoping to destroy it into pieces. Sparks flew out as the crocodile met an equally strong force resisting its bite. Surprisingly, the drone survived the Synergy diva's crunch. The drone continued to navigate through the field of aura, with the constant pressure of the Synergy diva bearing down on it. Its flight was unsteady, tilting to the side and bobbing up and down uncontrollably. But aside from those, the drone looked to be in perfect shape, with no deformities whatsoever. Urlos and Reptar eyed the drone that was coming to them with fear and shock. They didn't think someone could break into their synergy so easily. The drone was clearly flying towards them, that they could be certain of. Both had the same idea at the same time. Reptar reared his fist backwards before launching a powerful punch towards the drone. At the same time, Urlos cracked his whip to the drone with tremendous force, meeting the gauntlets at its side. And after a moment, crack! Chapter 558. Mithril Weapon. Both weapons clashed, with the drone glowing with the power of a mithril relic. It wasn't long before the sound of cracking metal was heard echoing out into the forest. But as they looked at the drone, they realized that it wasn't the one getting destroyed. It was their weapons instead. Reptar's gauntlets were shattering from the knuckles and propagating outwards into the wrist. Light leaked out of the cracks, as if the power hidden inside it was slowly dissipating outside. The whip experienced the same breaking force. Its head exploded into a fray of individual threads, with the other knots in the whip following its eruption like a domino. It wasn't long before both mithril relic weapons reached the final point of failure. A sense of defeat and shock flashed over Urlos and Reptar's faces while their weapons glowed brightly. They couldn't believe that their trusted weapons would break at the very critical moment. Finally, their weapons exploded outwards, with a blinding light propagating a shockwave that sent the wind whistling in the forest. As the gust of air settled down, the only thing left in Urlos and Reptar's hands was dust. This was the only remnant they had for their mithril relics. With their weapons destroyed, their divas soon lost their only connection to the real world. The visible aura surrounding them powered down and slowly disappeared. The skeleton-armored crocodile twisted and deformed before some sort of force ripped it apart in half and returned their individual divas to their respective owners. They both fell to their knees, completely defeated in body and in mind. The loss of their mithril relics was a huge blow, not just to their own egos but to their hearts as well. They were their partners for a long time. And now it was gone, with no way to get them back. They couldn't even grieve. Even at this point, they didn't know what happened. How could that metal object withstand the power of their Synergy diva? How come it was their mithril relic weapons that were destroyed instead of it? So many questions were left in their mind, all of them unanswered. Meanwhile, in the auction room, the entirety of the crowd was plunged into silence. They had their jaws firmly dropped to the ground, still unable to process what had just happened. They were already sure that Urlos and Reptar would win because of their unexpected synergy. It was supposed to be a surefire victory on their side. But then Michael went ahead and surprised them once more, as his strange metal object flipped the entire situation around and destroyed two perfectly good mithril relic weapons into dust. How can that even happen? There's no way two weapons got destroyed after hitting a single metal object. Were they fractured from the start? Common sense dictated that mithril relics were the strongest weapons in the world. And two of them could break anything in half. So it was either common sense was wrong or that there was another explanation for what just happened. Wait, could it be that? I think so too. That flying object was a mithril weapon. It has to be. It's Michael's weapon. This realization sent the crowd gasping in shock. They couldn't even reconcile the idea of such a strange flying object to being classified in the same group as swords, axes, and spears. They just didn't fit together. However, this was the only explanation as to how it was able to withstand the power of the Synergy Diva and the two mithril relic weapons. Only mithril could damage other mithrils. While the majority were still unable to process this information, the major factions and some of the stronger companies were starting to entertain an even crazier possibility. Bobby was the first one to get it. As a descendant of the Hephaestus line, he studied the textbooks and the scrolls passed down from generation to generation all the way back to the ancient times. They were being taught and molded to be the very best artisans and blacksmiths in the world. Their end goal as a family was to bring back the glory of the ancient humans. They wanted to bring back the golden age when mithril was the standard metal used in the world. Because of this, they studied mithril relics as much as they could. They observed how it was made, how it had deteriorated, and of course how it was before when it was originally made, back when it wasn't called a relic but an artifact. So when Bobby saw the drone destroy two minimalware mithril relics with ease, he immediately became certain. That flying object is a mithril artifact, he gasped. The fact that it still remained unscathed after the collision proved his point even more. All of his other crew members were just as shocked as he was. They had never set their sights upon a genuine mithril artifact before, and one that was as strange as that. I knew the disparity between mithril relics and artifacts was big, but I never thought it would be to this extent. Facing against two mithril relics, it persevered. That's way too strong. How could it even fly? Is it a technological remnant from the ancient era? The Order of the Heavenly Knights kept the most well-preserved mithril relics in the whole world. Kruger had seen multiple weird weapons in their collection, but never as weird as this flying weapon. He didn't even know how it functioned at all without the use of magic. There was just one thing on his mind. Where did he discover that flying mithril artifact? In fact, every single one from the major factions thought the same thing. But once the mystery and intrigue behind the drone died down a little bit, everyone started talking about Michael. The Wonder Boy. The mystic genius. No one expected him to come this far. But he disproved them yet again. First, he was able to defeat Rena in a fair battle. She was ranked dead last in the Rising Six. So many people weren't that yet impressed at Michael when he did that. But now they had nothing else to say. Reptar was ranked third. Erlos was ranked fourth. And their ranking was when they were just by themselves. It didn't take into account their newly found strategy of synergizing with each other. Michael didn't just defeat them unknown. He defeated them at the same time, and in decisive fashion. He didn't crawl his way to victory, he had it in his hands the whole entire time. It became even more unbelievable for others to think that Michael was able to win against the two of them despite facing all odds against him. He came out with but a few scratches while his opponents got their bodies beaten up and their weapons utterly destroyed. No matter what happens in this auction from tonight onwards, Michael would come out as a figure worthy to be at the top. As for his flying mithril artifact, it would come to be known as a terrifying weapon that even the major factions had to be wary of. Michael took a big breath of fresh air. Finally, he could relax for a little bit. For a second there, he thought he'd have to escape away into safety. But in the end, a surge of instinct led him to realize that his drone was far stronger than the mithril relics of his opponents. That sound. It's trying to tell me something, he realized. He looked down at his chest, peering through to the Godforge pieces in his heart. Was it you? He asked, but there was no answer. Despite winning against two very tough opponents, there was a sense of dissatisfaction left in Michael's mouth. It was as if he was on the verge of something, but he just couldn't tell what. Chapter 559. Amicable Talk. Rena looked at Michael with complete disbelief in her eyes. She felt like she was seeing a dream. He did it. He defeated them. Against all odds, he triumphed against two formidable fighters working together to defeat him. Even with their surprising synergy, Michael was still able to assert his victory over theirs. She realized now how foolish she had been all this time. She thought that Michael was foolish trying to take on the Rising Six all by himself. After all, she fought tooth and nail to get to the spot where she was now. But Michael proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he could contend with the best of them. She wouldn't have been able to defeat Erlos or Reptar by themselves. And together she stood no chance even if she was in her peak condition. Yet Michael did it with his 8 elemental mastery, his mysterious time-stopping ability, and his strange hovering metal weapon. All of those combined gave him power beyond anything she or anyone had ever seen before. Her father was right. Michael was much more powerful than she gave him credit for. Maybe he was right in other aspects as well. Daughter. Catch his heart. Rena's cheeks turned beet red with smoke almost coming out of her ears. She couldn't help but let her imagination run wild. She saw herself in a white gown carrying 2 babies in her hands with hair as yellow as gold. And the one right by her side was a tall, dashing man with the same golden hair as her children. And once she looked closer at the man's face, she saw none other than, "What am I thinking?" She screamed under breath. She shook her head, trying to get rid of the thought, but it persisted in her mind like an endless painting. Meanwhile, Reptar plopped down on the ground, completely exhausted. "That was a mithril artifact, wasn't it?" "Yes, it is," Michael replied. Reptar tipped his cowboy hat in respect. "I hate to admit it, but you defeated us fair and square. Actually, it's not even fair since we ganged up on you." Erlos groaned as he picked off a long stem of grass and tied it on his wounds, keeping it from bleeding any further. "I guess it's our bad luck that we encountered you this early. Good fight, though. You sure gave us quite a beating." Despite the loss, both were very amicable towards Michael. Just like they said earlier in the fight, this was just a game, and anything that happened within it was not personal. In fact, losing to Michael made them like him even more now. There was a sense of familiarity and friendliness that could only sprout once they had battled near death. 3 of us are down, meaning that there are 3 others left in the game. What are you planning on doing next?" Reptar asked Michael. In response, Michael shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I'll wait it out until my teammates find a key." Reptar and Erlos disagreed with his current plan. Bo's crewmates are one of the best there is. They may not have abilities, but their fighting skills are top-notch. Not only that, but they are specifically trained for all sorts of situations, including finding hidden treasures in a location, Erlos said. "They'll find all the keys soon if they haven't already." He was trying to say that Bo may very well be on her way towards the glass dome to claim the 5 drops of Sue hidden inside it. Michael had no time to wait. He had to strike. "You're pretty strong," Reptar admitted. "I think that you're even better than Fim, making you the 2nd best fighter in all of the Rising 6. I suggest that you find the other remaining players in the game and try to convince them to team up with you. That's the only way to make sure that Bo is eliminated before she can get the Sue drops." Both of them were rooting for Michael to win the auction now. That way their defeat against him wouldn't be too humiliating. "Is Bo really that strong?" he asked them. Reptar and Erlos gravely nodded. "She's the top of the Rising 6 for a reason. It's not just the fact that she's at the 6th stage of body formation. It's also because of the way she uses her ability to dominate her opponents." Michael was a little bit concerned after hearing that. He knew he could defeat someone 1 stage above himself. But 2 stages? That would stretch the limit of what he could achieve. For a second, he considered their suggestion of teaming up with the other players to defeat Bo. However, this thought quickly died down. First of all, he wasn't that kind of person. He would much rather fight fairly and lose. Second of all, he wasn't that thrilled about cooperating with other people he didn't know about. It also meant that he would probably have to share the drops with them in the end. He might be called selfish for this, but he wanted all those 5 drops for himself. Just then, that familiar sound echoed throughout his mind again. His head twitched as he tried to listen to the sound more closely than before. He tried to discern what it was, but he still had no clue where it came from or what it meant. It was like he was trying to recall a word and becoming really close to remembering it to the point where it was on the tip of his tongue. But no matter how much he tried to think of it, he just couldn't remember it. This unsatisfying sensation frustrated him to the point where his face was visibly scrunched. His weird behavior was quickly noticed by Reptar and Erlos. "What's wrong?" they asked him. Michael waved off their concern. "It's nothing. I just keep hearing this sound. At first I thought it came from somewhere around me, but now I feel like the sound comes from my own body." Reptar and Erlos both looked at each other. Their eyes signaled recognition. "You're hearing things?" Reptar asked. "What kind of sound is it?" "I don't know. It doesn't really sound like anything I know. It's kind of abstract, like a passing thought. But whenever I try to..." Erlos' eyes widened. "And this sound, does it give you a new thought? Like an instinct?" Michael nodded. "That's right. That's exactly what it is," he told them. Reptar and Erlos looked at Michael as if he had just told them that he didn't know what water sounded like. "You don't know what that is?" Reptar asked as if this was common knowledge. "What is it?" "That's your diva communicating with you," Erlos exclaimed. This surprised Michael. "They can talk?" "No, they can't talk. But they can communicate with you through nonverbal signals. This happens when the diva is trying to tell you something, when it is teaching you the power that it contains," Erlos explained. "When divas do this, they are communicating to their user that they are on the brink of discovering a new power, a new ability." Chapter 560, Diva Signals. Chapter 560, Diva Signals. Michael was surprised to learn that it was his diva communicating with him throughout this entire time. And it wasn't just trying to make small talk. It was giving him clues to a new ability power that he could awaken. "So that's why I feel like I'm trying to understand something I can't remember." He was pleasantly surprised to learn this. If they hadn't told him about this then, he would have probably kept on ignoring his diva signals and passing it off as background noise. "That means that I can learn a new ability?" Michael asked them. Yes, as you advance through the stages you will start to awaken more and more of your diva's abilities. That's what the body formation realm is all about. It's about learning what your diva's true power is and learning to control it, Reptar explained. But you must remember that it is also your limit. If you cannot understand or awaken the new ability that your diva is communicating with, then you won't be able to progress through the stages of the body formation realm. Even if you forcefully put all the Godforge pieces in your body, you won't be able to advance your cultivation. Your body will reject it and might cause you serious injury. Erlos and Reptar were very familiar with this rule because it was taught to them from the very beginning. They were told that cultivating a diva does not simply mean putting more Godforge pieces in your heart. It was about learning and understanding your diva. Many impatient and power-hungry individuals learned this lesson the hard way. They tried to put enough Godforge pieces in their heart to boost their cultivation from the first stage all the way to the 9th stage. In the end, their bodies turned into a pink mist, as they couldn't handle the power and energy held by their diva. You're telling me that this is the first time that your diva communicated with you? Erlos asked, confused. Michael clearly already had an ability of his own. It was that iron block that somehow paused anything and everything's time and momentum completely still. So he should have heard the sound of his diva by now. This is the first time I'd heard an actual sound coming from my diva, Michael admitted. This made Erlos and Reptar even more surprised than when he showed that he had an 8 elemental mastery. They looked at Michael and started to reconsider their thoughts on him. After all, this meant only one thing. Michael's diva had yet to reach maturity. It was still undeveloped. But despite that, Michael's time-stopping ability was already able to overpower an ability that was one stage above his own. If his ability was already that powerful, then what kind of power would he awaken in the future? Erlos and Reptar didn't feel bad about being beaten by Michael now. In fact, they felt relieved they were out of the game. It sounded like Michael was on the verge of discovering his new ability. And if they had fought him for a little longer, then he could have awakened it and beaten them down even harder than before. How will I awaken my ability? He asked them. You fight, plain and simple. The more you use your diva and your ability, the more you'll be more familiar with its power. You'll find more progress if you fight with someone that is stronger than you, someone that will challenge your strength to the fullest. You have to be forced to your limits. That's the best way to awaken your abilities naturally. By being pushed to the limits, one's own natural instincts would take over. This would make it easy for someone to tap into the hidden power of the diva. Michael was a lot more excited now, knowing that he was on the verge of a discovery. As long as he fought more, then he would eventually learn about this new ability that his diva was trying to tell him about. He couldn't help but look forward towards the glass dome. By now, the rest of the players were probably advancing towards the center of the map, trying to get into the Sudrops. And even though he didn't have his own keys yet, he already planned on going there right this very moment. Thanks for telling me all of this, he said to them. He was genuinely grateful. And after giving them a nod, he began walking forwards with the glass dome directly in the horizon. Wait, are you not going to search for the other players? Reptar asked, trying to stop him. He shook his head. Nope. I'm going where the action is at. He used his supreme talent to see where the rest of the players were located in the pocket dimension. And surprisingly enough, he saw 3 distinct light mana signatures near the glass dome. And if he wasn't mistaken, it looked like the 3 of them were fighting. One of them was even showing an enormous amount of energy, one that eclipsed the 2. It was easy to guess what was happening. Bo was fighting against the last 2 players in the game. This made him want to get there as soon as possible. He didn't want to miss out on the opportunity of fighting against other strong magnetics for a chance to awaken his ability. You don't even have keys yet, Erlos pointed out. Michael smiled. It's okay. I trust my team. After that, he sped off forwards with his drone flying right beside him. Erlos and Reptar both stared at Michael's fading figure. What do you think? Do you think he can do it? Can he defeat Bo? Reptar asked. I don't know. If you had asked me that a few minutes ago, I would have said that Bo would still win against him in the end. But now, I don't know. This was the biggest compliment they could give Michael. The fact that they were even considering that he could win against Bo was unbelievable in the first place. Everyone knew that Bo was the strongest magnetic out of everyone here. It was a unanimous decision. But now there could be some arguments to say that she was in danger of losing that spot. If not now, then possibly in the future. Michael's potential was through the roof. Just then Erlos and Reptar saw a beam of light shine down on them from the skies. Their bodies started to shimmer in and out of existence. Now that they were out of the game, Barnaby was recalling them back to the auction. Despite losing, they were both excited to see everything that would happen in the game. Looks like we'll be spectators this time, Reptar said, chuckling to himself. That's not too bad. I want to see how this all plays out. Hey Rena, want to come with us and have a watch party for the game? They both looked to the side and saw Rena still holding her blushing cheeks and swaying side to side. She seemed to be scolding herself for something. Stop thinking about him, she muttered out loud. Reptar and Erlos both looked at each other. What's wrong with her? Chapter 561. Bo vs. 2. Chapter 561. Bo vs. 2. I can't get over how Michael was able to defeat them both at the same time. And did you see his strange mithril weapon? I want to see it in person. Wait. Look over there. While everyone was still reeling over the events of what happened with Michael's fight, there was a completely new development taking place on the northern side of the map. Barnaby immediately got everyone's attention towards this new event. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like that wasn't the last time we're going to see an interesting fight. Here we have the game favorite Bo going up against the other two of the Rising Six. 3 of the last 4 remaining players had gathered near the outer boundary separating the rest of the map to the glass dome. From a point of view above them, it looked like all 3 were involved in a Mexican standoff where they were keeping each other at bay, preventing anyone from stepping any closer towards the glass dome. But in truth, 2 of them were actually working together to prevent one of them from advancing. That was none other than Bo Regard, the undisputed strongest player among the Rising Six. In front of her was Fim from Angelic Crafts and Tenzing from the Mountain Movers. Fim was a youthful-looking man who looked only a year older than Michael despite being in his 20s. He wore what seemed to be a full white rain coat around himself, making him look all the more childish. And even though it looked like Fim's bangs prevented him from looking closely at Bo, he was actually fully aware of what was happening to his surroundings. Any micro-movements that Bo made were visible to him at the moment it happened. His awareness was what helped him achieve the number 2 spot in the Rising Six ranking just below Bo. As for Tenzing, his tan skin and his tall and lanky physique may seem like he was frail, but the truth was the exact opposite. When it came to pure strength, even Bo couldn't hold a candle to him. He was ranked 5th in the rankings above Rena and below Erlos. The whole crowd were beside themselves in anticipation. Everyone expected Bo to win, however, being cornered by Fim and Tenzing could prove to be her downfall this time around. But as Barnaby and the rest of the crowd looked a little closer at what was going on, they realized that the fight wasn't just starting. It was nearing its end. Fim and Tenzing were already at their limits, with their bodies bloodied and bruised. They were barely even standing up at this point. Compared to them, Bo was still in tip-top condition. She was safe within her army of cake soldiers with no scratch nor dirt in her pink frilly dress. Fim and Tenzing are working together, but they are still losing against Bo? Wasn't Fim considered just a tad bit below Bo in strength? He almost defeated her last year in the same auction. With Tenzing around, they should have been able to defeat Bo. Does that mean that Bo became even stronger than before? Fim and Tenzing weren't even planning on working together at all. In fact, they were even fighting against each other earlier in the game. But then they stumbled upon Bo by accident. And what they saw made them immediately team up to try and stop her. Bo, with larger-than-life curled-up blonde hair, arrived with her usual pink and frilly dress that wasn't appropriate in a battle whatsoever. Behind her was a veritable army of animated stuffed toys made out of some kind of cake and frosting material. There were giant teddy bear soldiers, two-legged walking knives made out of real metal, and any other cute but terrifying creations she could muster. That wasn't the reason why Fim and Tenzing wanted to work together. It was what she had on her waist that made them alert in the first place. On her red ribbon belt there were 5 glowing golden keys dangling at her side. Those were the keys of this game. Her teammates had already gathered all 5 of them. This meant that all she needed to do was to go to the glass dome and claim all 5 drops of Su for herself. Fim and Tenzing only had 2 keys each. It was clear that, as reluctant as they might be, they needed to settle their differences for now and stop Bo from hogging all the drops for herself. "Get out of the way, pretty please," Bo said, tilting her head and acting all cutesy. But of course Fim and Tenzing didn't fall for her tricks. Fim held his mithril relic sword with trembling hands, revealing a white human-like figure with wings floating above him. That was his diva. Tenzing stabbed the bottom of his spear on the ground, using it to keep himself steady. He revealed a giant snowy mountain on top of him as a diva. "All right, if that's what you're going to do, then I'll just have to force my way there," Bo said, flicking her hair carelessly. "Get them." And with those few words, her army charged towards Fim and Tenzing. One giant pink and white slice of cake charged towards Fim. With his sword at the ready, Fim performed an upward strike that sliced the cake in half. The 2 halves fell lifeless beside Fim. But a moment later it reanimated itself as 2 individual slices of cake, albeit a smaller one. They then smushed themselves towards Fim, forcing him to the ground. Using his ability, Fim conjured a pillar of light from his hands. He grabbed this light and swung it towards the cake, burning it with intense heat and temperature. Just when Fim thought he'd be able to stand up, more slices of cake charged towards him and smothered him from all sides. As Fim conjured up more beams of light to fight off these slices, they suddenly grabbed a hold of his own beam of light and broke it off in half. One of the cakes grabbed the broken beam of light and started to bend it into its own body, creating a pillar of light resembling a candle. On the other side, Tenzing was facing 4 different teddy bear soldiers, each wearing icing as their armor. As one soldier rushed to puncture him with a large fishbone, Tenzing brought down his spear to the ground, grazing the teddy bear's head by a small margin. At that moment his ability activated at the moment of contact, and an image of a snow mountain appeared on top of the teddy bear. Suddenly a massive downward force overcame the teddy bear's body and instantly crushed its body, as if the weight of an entire mountain was on its back. He continued to swing his spear towards the other teddy bears that came his way, each ending with the same mountain crushing them in an instant. However, just like with what happened with Fim, Bo's creation suddenly grabbed Tenzing's mountain ability and molded it to fit into their own bodies. Suddenly each step of the teddy bears created cracks on the ground. This was why Bo was feared as the best magnetic in the Rising Six. Chapter 562. 2 left. Chapter 562. 2 left. What followed after that was a systemic dismantling of Fim and Tenzing, all without Bo moving a single inch. The crowd were completely speechless as to how one-sided the fight became. Everyone thought that Fim would have the best chance of defeating her in the auction. But as it turned out, even with Tenzing helping him, they still weren't able to get a scratch on Bo. By the end both were completely battered, bruised, and exhausted. No matter what they did, they just couldn't defeat her endless horde of food constructs. Fim and Tenzing had to surrender. They had to watch as Bo walked towards the glass dome completely unimpeded, and with the golden keys dangling beside her. She'd get all 5 Su drops for herself. At that moment they suddenly heard the voice of Barnaby coming out from the heavens above them. Players, with Fim and Tenzing out for the count, there are only 2 players left standing. If you haven't gotten a key as of now, then you'd better make sure that those with the key won't get anywhere near the glass dome. The game had progressed much further than they thought. Usually there would be 3 or 4 players left by the time that everyone got near the glass dome. But now there's just 2. One of them was Bo, but the other was a complete mystery to them. They had a lot of guesses, with the most obvious answer being Reptar from the Crocodile Leather Company. His diva cultivation was the highest among them, being in the 5th stage, and his ability was also the most destructive and would easily defeat the other players' divas. However, Erlos couldn't be counted out either. The man was smart and could use his skeletal alligator ability with creativity. Bo stopped in her tracks and looked around herself. She was curious to see who would be her last competitor in the game. "Are you going to come out?" Bo asked, her voice echoing through the forest. And just a few seconds later Fim and Tenzing heard rustling on a bush beside them. Then they saw him float out and into the clearing. It wasn't Reptar, it wasn't Erlos, and it wasn't even Rena. It was Michael, the only odd man out of the group, the only one who wasn't in the ranks of the Rising Six. Surprise and confusion flashed across their faces. They weren't expecting to see him out of all people here at this late stage in the game. And right in this moment Fim and Tenzing's body started to phase in and out of existence. Because they lost and had to surrender against Bo, they were now getting teleported out of the game and back into the auction. A few seconds later they found themselves back on the stage with the rest of the crowd applauding them for a good try. Just as they were about to go back into the private suites, they were approached by Reptar and Erlos. "You should come with us to watch the game," Erlos suggested. Because they were all friends, this was a yearly tradition they had after they lost in the auction. They would get together and have a chat about what happened during the game and discuss who would win the next. "I'll go with you. I'm curious to know how both of you got eliminated out of the game," Fim said, his curious and prying eyes hiding behind his bangs. "Did you both eliminate each other like last time?" Tenzing asked, grabbing Reptar by the shoulders and joking with him. Erlos chuckled. "Not exactly. We'll explain to you when we get to my private suite." As they entered Erlos' room, Fim and Tenzing saw Rena already there with her eyes completely glued to the pocket dimension below. She was blushing, which was very weird to see since she usually hid her expression behind her veil. "I can't believe that the Reborn kid was the one who is left behind," Tenzing said, sitting down on one of the chairs. "Bo's going to end up with 5 more Su drops for herself, which just increases the gap between us." Fim agreed with his observation. "It is unfortunate, but from what I can observe the boy is only in the 4th stage of body formation. He can't even defeat you, Reptar." At this point both Erlos and Reptar chuckled to themselves with self-deprecating smiles. Actually, it was at that moment that they heard the crowd gasp. They quickly looked towards the pocket dimension and saw that the fight between Michael and Bo had already started. As expected, Bo commanded her hundreds of animated food and pastry to overwhelm Michael with numbers. Giant walking cupcakes threw sharp sprinkles like throwing stars, tall baguettes slithered through the grass, and the trees like snakes, and amorphous rice porridge jumped like slimes towards Michael. "That's where she got us," Fim said. "Her food has leveled up even more than last year. It's much smarter and a lot stronger than before. I think this is where the boys' game will end," Tenzing sighed. But it was at that moment that 8 magic circles appeared above Michael. 8? He must be a really good mystic arts user, Tenzing said with an approving nod. "But it's not enough. She has hundreds while he'll only have." Fim's words were cut off when he saw multiple more light sources spring forth in the forest. Michael continued to conjure up more and more magic circles behind him, each one cycling through 8 different colors that corresponded to different elements. Eventually, the magic circles numbered up to the hundreds. Hundreds at the same time? Does he have an infinite mana source or something? How's he doing that? Meanwhile, Reptar and Urlos were just nodding along as they watched as all kinds of magical animals jumped out of the magic circles. Each one had a specific element that boosted an animal's specific trait. That's what I've been trying to tell you. There's a lot of things you missed seeing, Urlo said. Do you want to know why we got eliminated so early in the game? It's because of him. Those magic animals and his ability defeated us, Reptar admitted. They looked at Urlos and Reptar with disbelief in their eyes, as if they were just waiting for them to say that it was just a joke. I can see him defeating Urlos, no offense. But I can't see him defeating you, Reptar. You're one stage higher than him, Thim argued. Reptar shrugged. Yep. He defeated me fair and square. His ability and his weapon is something to be feared. We couldn't even defeat him when we synergized. This time Thim and Tenzing couldn't close their jaws shut. They remained stun-locked for a few seconds as they tried to process the information they just heard. You mean to tell me you both fought against him at the same time? Tenzing asked, his eyebrows fused together. Yup. And during that fight you were able to synergize? And you still lost. That's the gist of it. Chapter 563. Animals versus Foods. You know, I've been very curious about you, Bo said to Michael with a smile on her face. How come there's a company that appears out of nowhere and seems to have an unlimited amount of funds? Michael shrugged. Well, here I am. Bo nodded. Yep. Here you are. I've been wanting to meet you, and just my luck you happen to be the last player here in our game. Coincidence, luck, or skill? I don't know. You tell me, he said as 8 magic circles appeared behind him, followed by 10 more and 20 more after that. He conjured up as many magic circles as the amount of constructs that Bo had plus extra. Bo's eyes widened as she saw hundreds of spells being cast at the same time. She didn't even know that people could cast more than 4 spells, let alone hundreds. At that moment she had her answer. You have an 8-element mastery. Bo shouted out. That's the reason why you survived this long. I'm excited to fight with you. Bo commanded her army of animated food and pastries to march towards Michael. In response, hundreds of animals manifested out of the magic circles and jumped in front of Michael as if the doors to the famous Noah's Ark had been opened. Animals ranged from predators as large as crocodiles, tigers, and lions to something as small as a rat, a squirrel, and even a swarm of ants. Each one of them were imbued with the power of a single element that improved a specific trait related to that element. Those with the air element became faster and a lot lighter, those with fire had destructive capabilities enhanced, and so on and so forth. The first line of defense for Bo's army were large slices of loaf bread, which used their own bodies as shields towards the onslaught of the animals. The fastest jaguars, panthers, lions, and cheetahs were the first to charge. The animals lunged towards the slices of bread, using their sharp nails to first cut through the skin before tackling them to the ground and using their fangs to rip its body apart into pieces. In response, 10 blocks of wool cheese rolled down the grasses and tackled the animals with force and power. The animals recoiled from the pain and forced off their prey. But that wasn't the end. The wheels of cheese suddenly sprayed hot melted cheese towards the tigers and the jaguars, damaging their magic integrity. The lions were the first to recover. They charged forwards and tried to attack the wheels of cheese. But the wheels moved aside and dodged their attacks. However, this seemed to be all part of their plan, as a panther lunged to the side and fused with the lion, creating a combination of fire and lightning mana that created an explosion that destroyed the wheel of cheese. As Thim and Tenzing were watching all of this from above, they were amazed at how Michael seemed to be perfectly matching Bo in terms of her army. Even they couldn't do that. You're right. He does have an 8-element mastery. Thim said, still in disbelief. If it's just a matter of constructs, he can even surpass Bo. Tenzing remarked. And just like they said, Michael continued to conjure up more and more magic circles in the air. As the cupcake warriors and bread shields tore apart the magical animals, Michael continued to replace them at an even faster pace than they were getting destroyed. It was a testament to his skill and his talent that he could even keep up with this expenditure. Does he have an unlimited amount of mana? Meanwhile, the Tower Master and the rest of the wizards also watched Michael's battle with Bo and couldn't help but commend Michael for his seemingly endless amount of mana. If he's just fighting against other magnetics, then this would be an easy win, the Tower Master muttered. Unfortunately, Bo's ability perfectly counters Michael's spells. One of the wizards was clueless. What do you mean? The stronger her opponent, the stronger she becomes, the Tower Master revealed. At that same moment, 5 two-tiered giant frosted cakes moved towards the front line, waddling side to side like penguins. These were Bo's generals, and they were fully decked out in frosted defensive gear, as well as their own knives to cut things with. Michael's army of multi-elemental eagles swooped down and tried to claw out huge pieces of cake from the generals. The cakes raised their knives and parried the eagles away with ease. Claws and metals clashed together, creating sparks. And just as the eagles were about to fly up high again and swoop down, they suddenly split in half with their halved bodies falling lifelessly to the ground. The cakes then picked up the eagles' sliced bodies and attached them to the tops of their heads, making it as their own decoration. And suddenly the cakes' bodies began to glow with power and magic. A few seconds later, they started levitating off the ground before they finally took off and started flying with speed and precision exactly like an eagle. "Do you like it?" Bo asked, standing atop her own cupcake general. "This is my ability. I'll give you a hint. I can use anything as my ingredient and create an entirely new creation from it." "That's her ability?" Michael wondered as he watched his own spell just get taken from him. "What do you think ChatJK for?" From preliminary observations, it seems that Bo has the ability to make an entirely new creation out of anything in the world. And it seems that this creation will obtain any of the power or magic of its ingredients. However, it is still unknown as to why her own creation can use her ability without her input. Michael finally understood why people found Bo so hard to fight with. After all, she could just use magic spells or anything else in the world to power her own creations. If her ability was contingent on the fact that she had to physically be in contact with her new ingredient, then it would be easier to deal with. But the fact that her own creations could pull something out of the world and use it for themselves was what made them so dangerous in the first place. They were basically self-sustaining. As her army continued to defeat enemies, then they would grow more and more even without Bo doing anything at all. And it seemed like his magic animals were the perfect nourishment for Bo's army. Each animal was imbued with pure mana and potent elements. If Bo's army got a hold of them, then they would basically be superpowered creations that couldn't be stopped. And that exact scenario seemed to be occurring at this moment. The flying two-tiered cakes used their newfound powers to smash and destroy the other flying birds and animals in the air. The aerial animals turned into mush as they got bulldozed by the giant cakes in the air. Not only that, but their remains fell down to the ground and got picked up by the bread shields, the cupcake warriors, the soup golems, and the rest of her army. As Bo's creations obtained this new power, the balance of power quickly shifted towards their direction. It wasn't long before hundreds of Michael's magic animals were consumed and turned into an ingredient. "You're trying to take my spells away from me?" Michael scoffed. "My supreme talent says otherwise." Chapter 564. Take Back. The crowd could only groan in disappointment once they saw Michael's magic animals become a free-for-all buffet for Bo's constructs. Damn. It's Michael's bad luck that Bo has complete advantage over mystic arts users. Yeah. No matter how powerful or how strong his spells are, they'll just end up as nourishment for those food constructs. That's the nature of abilities. They're the natural enemies of mana. With just one touch from Bo's ability, she can completely take control of Michael's spells as if it were hers. Even the wizards from the magic tower couldn't help but voice out their displeasure at seeing Bo's overpowering ability. "This is why I hate abilities. They just don't conform to normal standards. How can it just take control of mana so easily like that?" If he knew about Bo's ability from the start, then he could have avoided using magic spells. Alas, it's his first time in this auction, so he was completely clueless. "Tower Master, we must speak with Michael soon after this. No doubt that he will be distraught and heartbroken after this loss against Bo. Maybe we can use this opportunity to recruit him to our side." Everyone was already counting the moments when Michael would finally surrender to Bo. After all, his mystic arts talent was completely nullified because of Bo's ability. Any spell he did after this would be futile and would only empower her constructs further. However, the Tower Master didn't think it was over just yet. While his wizards were already discussing what would happen after this auction, his eyes were still glued onto the pocket dimension. He was looking at Michael, who didn't have a look of defeat and dismay painted on his face. Instead, there was a mysterious smile growing on his mouth. And a few moments later, the anticipated surrender didn't come. "Barnaby, why isn't he still being teleported out? He can't be hurt too much. His mystic arts talent is too precious. Maybe you didn't hear him." Barnaby didn't expect people to be this protective of Michael. But his performance against Reptar and Erlos gained him a lot of supportive fans that wouldn't want him to experience any more defeat against Bo. He quickly had to clarify the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, my hands are tied. Michael has no indications of surrendering," he announced, much to the surprise and confusion of the crowd. "Your talent in the mystic arts is truly something to behold," Bo praised. "My constructs have never been this powerful. Do you have any intention of being one of my crew members? I'll pay you handsomely." She loved the power that the magic animals gave her so much, so that she wanted Michael to be a permanent addition to her company. That way she'd be able to empower her constructs just like today. But of course Michael had no intention of being under her employ. "What makes you think this is over?" he said to her. Bo narrowed her eyes and saw Michael spreading his arms wide. She didn't know what he was doing, but she immediately felt a change in the atmosphere. There was something gathering towards Michael, but she just didn't know what. And just as she was about to command one of her cupcake warriors to check him out, she suddenly realized that something was happening with her constructs. Her generals, the flying two-tiered cakes, were vibrating as they floated in the air. They weren't doing this out of their own accord. She wasn't commanding them to do this. Her constructs should be under her complete control, and she should be able to control it just as well as her own body. As she looked around, she realized that it wasn't just her general cakes who were experiencing this weird vibration. It was her entire food army. Each one of them were jittering uncontrollably, which was only getting more and more intense as the seconds passed by. Alarmed, Bo commanded them to return towards her. But it was at this point that her entire army felt a force pulling them away from her. The crusts of the bread shields started to tear away and sucked forwards. The sprinkles on the cupcakes were emerging from icing and shooting out. Even the soup golems were being slowly whittled down as drops were getting sucked in. Everything and anything was shooting towards one specific direction: Michael. Bo was at a complete loss as she saw everything unfold, yet unable to do anything about it. Suddenly, a literal line of water mana shot out from one of the bread shields and started to revolve towards Michael, as if he was the sun of a solar system. Soon after that, more and more pure blobs of mana started to emerge from Bo's constructs and began to return back into Michael's control. Her two-tiered cake generals tried hard to contain the magic eagles that it consumed, but eventually air mana in the form of a winged creature burst out of the cake's body and flew back towards Michael. One by one, Bo's constructs started to lose the very magic that they gained from consuming Michael's spells. Lightning started to leave her baguette soldiers. Fire was extinguished from her biscuits. And her tarts started to lose the poison in their fillings. This can't be. She knew what was happening, yet she couldn't understand why it was happening. This was supposed to be impossible. Those magic spells were consumed by her ability, meaning that it worked under the power of her own diva. No magic spell could take it back. No matter how talented Michael was in the mystic arts, no matter how many elements he mastered, it still wouldn't change the fact that they were coated with her ability. She knew that this wasn't Michael's ability because his diva hadn't shown up yet once during this fight. And he wasn't using it now. In fact, it didn't even look like he was using a magic spell to take back his mana. It looked like he was just opening his arms to welcome them home. What is happening? Even the other experts in magnetics and diva were perplexed. They knew more than others, and they knew that Michael's diva had something to do with freezing time or momentum. It didn't have something to do about returning magic or mana. Yet somehow he was able to overpower Bo's ability and forcefully take back his own magic spells like it was nothing. Even if he used an ability, that still wouldn't make sense. She was in the 6th stage while he was still in the 4th stage. The difference was too huge. Tower Master, do you know any kind of magic that can bypass an ability? Is he using a 9-star spell? No one could answer the questions. The Tower Master remained silent and continued to look at Michael. It wasn't as if he had absolutely no clue about what was happening. He knew that there could only be one explanation for this, but it would be far too surprising to even mutter out loud. Could it be? Meanwhile, the Duchess couldn't help but get out of her seat and stare at Michael with wonder in her eyes. Ha ha ha! I knew it! He has a supreme talent. Chapter 565. Frankenstein Chef. It had been well documented that anyone who possessed a supreme talent ended up becoming powerful enough to influence the world. Examples included the Ocean King, the Draconic Queen, and the Celestial Elf. They all had a supreme talent and ended up leading the entirety of their species to undergo a metamorphosis, becoming a global power in the world. There hadn't been a human who possessed a supreme talent. Until now. Until Michael arrived. The more she thought about it, the more obvious it became. Of course he had a supreme talent. It would explain so much how a boy like him could have these amazing powers that nobody else even thought was possible. He was talented in the mystic arts, he was a natural magnetic, and he had an amazing intellect for innovation as well. All of those pointed towards a talent unlike anyone had ever seen before. His supreme talent must have something to do with mana and magic, the Duchess deduced. His 8-element mastery and his uncanny ability to produce any and all kinds of spells out of the blue was proof of that. And the fact that he could control the mana on Bo's creatures despite her ability was the final evidence she needed to confirm her hypothesis. The Duchess couldn't contain her excitement. She was even more sure of her decision to support Michael during these early stages. She was grateful that she established her relationship with him before he truly exploded out into the global scene. I knew my instincts weren't wrong. Siding with him will be the best decision of my life, the Duchess declared. Having a supreme talent was a great indication of the potential Michael had down the road. His strength, his intellect, and especially his diva would prove themselves to be better than the rest, all because of his supreme talent. Bo was helpless as she saw mana blobs exploding out of her creations and returning to Michael's side. Her bread shields, her cupcake warriors, and the rest of the pastry battalion were all incurring exploding wounds as the mana burst out of their bodies trying to get to Michael. Finally, as the last mode of mana returned to Michael's side, her creations officially lost all of the powers they gained and even got destroyed in the process. All of the pastry and food soldiers fell down on the ground lifeless. I know what your ability is now, Michael said to Bo. I know how you're able to spread your powers to your creations. Thanks to her consumption of his spells, he was able to get a first-hand look on what was going on inside her creations. And what he found gave him a clue as to how her ability worked and how she was able to make herself as powerful as she was now. You put a piece of yourself in every creation. Hearing those words come out of him caught Bo off guard. She had met other magnetics who were able to subdue her creations. She even met others who were able to defeat it. But she had never met anyone who was able to discover the mystery to her powers. You said that you can use anything as an ingredient for your creations. That means that you can also use yourself. That's how each of your creations can use the same ability as you. Since her creations can get the power of the ingredient needed to create it, then by imparting part of her own body, her own soul towards her creation, then it would also be able to use her ability. But the downside of this is that once they're injured, you're injured too. Michael noticed that the light mana signature in Bo's body was a lot smaller than he anticipated. But once he realized that those light mana were instead imparted into her creations, everything made sense. Bo couldn't help but applaud Michael for his observational skills. You're right, she admitted. I used part of myself to create these constructs. She then reached behind her back to show a carving knife perfect for slicing meats, among other things. After all, this knife wasn't just a chef's tool, but it was also a pristine mithril relic that gave Bo the power to become a chef that can cook the natural world. Just as her knife glowed with a red light, a figure shimmered above her. It was a humanoid woman with stitches going all around its face and everywhere around its body. Its skin wasn't human, and it differed with each patch that was stitched to make up its whole face. Some of it was made out of bread, some made out of frosting, and some made out of jelly. The best way to describe this diva was if it was a Frankenstein's monster where the dead parts came from food and pastries. It wore a white apron that covered most of its body and a tall white pleated hat on its head that only certified chefs and cooks could wear. Bo licked her cleaver knife before smiling at Michael. She raised her weapon high up in the air with her Frankenstein chef diva mimicking her movements. And suddenly all the corpses of her destroyed food and pastry creations started to float up towards them. Crumbs of destroyed cakes, the sprinkle-like decorations in the ground, and even spilled porridge soup from the soup golems were being recalled back towards Bo's side. Michael thought she was going to recreate her army. But instead she started to gather all the pieces of her army into one giant ball, an amalgamation of everything she created. As she gathered more and more crumbs, the ball became as big as a giant boulder that towered over the tallest trees of the pocket dimension. And it didn't seem like it would end there. At its final shape, it reached a height of about 20 meters in total, or as high as a 5-story house. Once everything had gathered, the Frankenstein chef diva above Bo started to get to work. It moved its hands, showing it to be holding a knife and a flat pan in its hands, and started to cook an invisible food in an invisible stove. Suddenly the large sphere of what could only be described as leftover food started to mold and form into the likeness of a 4-legged monster resembling a gigantic bear. It looked just like Bo's diva, with its body looking like it had been stitched together from parts of different foods and pastries. But make no mistake, its power and ferality made it the monster it was supposed to be. Once the cooking process had finished, the bear stood up on its hind legs and let out a guttural scream, with the spikes on its back opening up like it was its defensive mechanism. Once the crowd saw this monster, they immediately recognized where Bo got inspiration from it. That's the 8-star monster Ursa Grizzla. I did see her sneak up on the Ursa Grizzla earlier in the game. She probably got a piece of it and is now using it to build her own 8-star monster. I can't believe that she still won't lose. Michael was even able to destroy her entire army with his strange mana retrieval. Of course, everyone was seeing an 8-star monster. But for Michael, he was seeing a completely different thing. He was seeing a very large target that couldn't dodge even if it wanted to. And this target just so happened to contain pieces of Bo's light mana inside it. Chapter 566. 2 beams, right timing. The Frankenstein Ursa Grizzla huffed towards Michael and got up on its hind legs as it tried to show its dominance. It raised one hand and swiped down towards Michael. Even though he was far away from it, the mere force and power from the Ursa Grizzla had shockwave of power that created a giant crevasse in the ground from where it swiped its hands. Hundreds of trees were destroyed in an instant, disturbing the natural habitats of wildlife in the pocket dimension. Michael reappeared just a second later, having used his shadow clone to avoid the Ursa Grizzla's attack. But just as he appeared atop a tree, the Ursa Grizzla suddenly reappeared in front of him with its giant paws just a few meters away from his face. Michael raised his hand with multiple layers of rock shields manifested at the same time. As the monster's paws hit, his defense's pure earth mana turned into dust and powder from the force. Tens of his shields were broken in an instant before its claws hit his absolute unity defense. The Ursa Grizzla's eyes widened as if felt resistance for the first time. Michael's unity defense allowed him enough time to teleport out into safety. Even Bo was surprised. She felt the monster's paws get burned after hitting Michael's invisible shield, which was supposed to have crumbled under the weight and power of an 8-star monster. While they were stunned, Michael finally took this chance to raise his hand towards the Ursa Grizzla with his finger glowing as it gathered the power of unity in a single point. Bo finally noticed what he was doing after seeing the bright white light in the corner of her eyes. But it was already too late. The unity gun fired off towards the Ursa Grizzla, hitting it directly in the chest, making it recoil backwards from the pain. "What?" she shouted in confusion. She tried to use her ability to regenerate the wounds that it had incurred from that strange white beam, but she was surprised to find out that the wound wasn't healing at all. The damage seemed to be permanent. Not only that, but she felt a pain in her chest akin to having a needle poked through her ribs. Michael had somehow picked the perfect spot where her soul was mixed into the monster. How? And before she could try and process what had happened, she saw Michael's hand flash with that same bright white light again. Aware of the power from that beam, Bo quickly sliced her knife towards the Ursa Grizzla. Suddenly, the Ursa Grizzla split in half, allowing Michael's unity beam to pass through where it had broken off. And just when she was going to repair her monster into one piece again, Michael's hands once again glowed with the power of unity. "What is that power?" she asked him. Bo quickly sliced the air 5 more times, allowing the Ursa Grizzla to separate into its limbs. Its head, its body, and its 4 limbs floated separately in the air. All of its parts began to separate into different directions, intending to surround Michael from all sides and prevent him from shooting that powerful beam again. One of the Ursa Grizzla's arms shot towards Michael like a rocket. Meanwhile, its body moved towards Michael's back, giving him no chance to escape. But instead of panicking, Michael carefully aimed his unity gun towards one of the idling forelimbs of the monster. His unity beam shot off at the same moment that the Ursa Grizzla's arm shot towards him. But with the near instantaneous speed of the unity beam, it beat out the arm by a large margin. As soon as the shot landed, Bo felt an insane amount of pain in her chest, so much so that her concentration on the Ursa Grizzla faltered for a little bit, causing them to malfunction and miss its target. KGH. Somehow Michael picked the exact spot where her light mana was hidden again. This is not a coincidence, she gravely realized. Now her attention was solely focused on Michael's hands. If it so much as glowed, then she would rush towards him and give him no chance to power up another one of his destructive beams. She went towards a tree and performed 10 slices in a second. Suddenly its trunk and the majority of its branches were trimmed off until the shape of an arrow was left behind. And finally she tapped her cleaver knife into her own chest and sliced out a thin piece of her own soul. This mode of light mana then moved towards the giant arrow, imbuing it with life and animation as if it was a real monster. Just then Michael's finger glowed as he aimed it towards the Ursa Grizzla's head. Bo launched the giant tree arrow towards him at speeds as fast as an arrow but as large and as powerful as a tree. Michael had to stop his unity gun for a second as he teleported himself out and into safety. He reappeared back down on the ground away from the Ursa Grizzla. However, the monster's senses seemed to be finely tuned into his scent as it immediately turned and rushed towards him, giving him no time to fire off another shot of unity gun. Bo had successfully prevented that bright beam from hitting. But unbeknownst to her, there was a metallic object just waiting behind her. Bzzzzz. And before she knew it, a unity beam had pierced through her back and into her chest. The Godforge pieces in her heart created a shield that protected her vital organ from being instantly destroyed, but the rest of the wound was still suffering from major burns. Arg. What? Where? Bo looked around only to see a strange metallic object floating just underneath the crown of a tree. And before she could try and understand what was happening, another unity gun shot off and hit her in the stomach. Michael used his chance well, hitting her 2 times in the span of a few seconds. This was the reason why he had kept the drone's existence a secret throughout this fight. He had been waiting for the right moment when all of her focus was occupied with him and nothing else. And it worked, much to the surprise of the crowd and everyone else. He actually injured Bo. He did it. What is that beam anyway? How is it able to go through her defenses and pierce through her ability? I'm more interested in his mithril weapon. How is he able to perform the same power as him? Fim and Tenzing were the one most surprised. They never even injured Bo at least once during this auction. And now it seemed like Michael was in a complete advantage over her. That weapon of his is a dangerous combination, Reptar said, drawing from his own experience. It's a mithril artifact with abilities unlike any other. After hearing and seeing everything Michael was capable of, Fim and Tenzing were starting to believe that Michael actually had a chance to defeat Bo. If his chances were at 0% at the start of this, then now it was at a whopping 25%. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.